Chapter 871. In the open battlefield where there was a distance, the real invincible was never and could not be human. Manpower was sometimes limited. However, the most ferocious firepower seemed to never stop. The Volcano Legion had completely collapsed. There were no obstacles in front of the Nightmare Legion. It could be said that they had really set foot on the road of death. They sprinted at full speed. Speed. The only thing the Nightmare Legion needed in such a situation was speed. Speed was very meaningful. Because the faster they were, the earlier they could rush into the base of the fierce tiger-armored legion. But speed was also meaningless. Because the distance between the two sides was too far. They could not cross a distance of nearly 20 kilometers in an instant. Such a long-distance charge was enough to make people desperate. The overwhelming artillery fire had completely turned the desert upside down. There were explosions everywhere. The burning flames and thick smoke almost covered everything. The powerful impact of the explosion was constantly surging in every inch of yellow sand around them. The masters of the Nightmare Legion tried their best to form layers of pseudo-domains. But the pseudo-domains, which were enough to withstand most weapons, were completely like bubbles in the dense and unimaginable artillery fire. Their physical strength was consumed quickly. There were no enemies in front of the Nightmare Legion. There were only yellow sand, only shells flying from a distance and then exploding around them. This journey was so boring and desperate. Everyone, including Lin Yuxian, had a sense of powerlessness. He used to be the heir of the Lin clan. The headquarters of the Lin clan stood aloof from worldly affairs, like a paradise. But the patriarchs of the Lin clan were not relaxed. From childhood to adulthood, Lin Yuxian had received the most rigorous and even cruel training. He did not have a unique physique like the Heavenly King's heart of wind and thunder veins, but his talent could also be said to be top-notch. Top-notch talent and top-notch inheritance. His series of conditions were not inferior to anyone else. He had also experienced so-called difficulties and even desperate situations, but he had never been as powerless as today. When he was at his strongest, he faced the concentrated fire of the entire heavy armor legion. The surging sword light whistled in the air. A large number of shells were smashed in the condensed sword light. The strong impact was constantly surging in all directions. He rushed to the forefront of everyone, charging and waving his sword. There was endless yellow sand in front of him. He did not even see the base of the fierce tiger-armored legion. Lin Yuxian did not know how far he had rushed. Maybe 1 kilometer. Maybe 10 kilometers. Everyone's line of sight was filled with cannonballs. It was as if the cannonballs would never stop raining down from afar, filling everyone's senses. The willpower of the Nightmare Army began to waver and become numb. In their muddle-headedness, they did not even know whether they were moving faster or slower. Wang Yi! A hoarse roar suddenly rang out, instantly suppressing the sounds of the surrounding explosions. Lin Yuxian, who was in a trance, was shocked and turned his head subconsciously. Fairy Tail frantically tried to run in another direction, but the elites of the Nightmare Legion pulled him back. The deafening explosion raised a large amount of smoke and sand. Lin Yuxian could not see what happened in that direction, but he remembered Wang Yi. He was one of the most promising candidates in the Nightmare Army to break through to the Thunder-Shocking Realm this year. He was Fairy Tail's cousin. When they were in the Deep Sea Academy, the two of them formed a team. Later, even though the team was broken up, the two of them had been watching over each other. But now, Wang Yi died here. Lin Yuxian, it was clear that this was just the beginning. The pseudo-domain supported by the Nightmare Legion was vulnerable in the bombardment, but it could block the fiercest attack of the enemy in an instant. This pseudo-domain was formed by the joint efforts of all the experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm and the peak of the Fire-Flaming Realm in the Nightmare Legion. The pseudo-domain was constantly formed and then constantly shattered. This process consumed a lot of physical strength of each participant. The experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm could still hold on. But the experts at the peak of the Fire-Flaming Realm were beginning to fail. Their current situation was even more dangerous than some experts of the Ice-Condensing Realm in the Nightmare Legion. The Ice-Condensing Realm only needed to charge. But they had to overdraft their physical strength to supplement the constantly shattered domain. Wang Yi was the first. Who would be the second? When the experts at the peak of the Fire-Flaming Realm were constantly sacrificed and fell, the domain of the Thunder-Shocking Realm was bound to be weaker. At that time, the ones who would fall would be the ordinary experts of the Fire-Flaming Realm and the peak of the Ice-Condensing Realm. Then the Thunder-Shocking Realm. The peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Half-step invincible realm. Lin Yuxian looked at the boundless yellow sand ahead. When they rushed to the tiger-armored legion, how many people would be left? And don't forget, behind the tiger-armored legion, there was the full 43rd Army, the trump card of Beijiang. There was also Gu Qianchuan and the murderous weapon-setting Sunday. Lin Yuxian gritted his teeth. He did not regret it. At this point, in any case, he only knew one thing. No matter what, they could not retreat. The number of the entire Nightmare Legion was getting smaller and smaller. They roared, like a beast constantly losing blood in a desperate situation, and rushed straight in the direction of the tiger-armored legion. They can't hold on any longer. In the command room of the tiger-armored legion, Commander Lin Dongzi saw this scene, and his tone was a little complicated. Victory was close at hand, and there was no suspense. But for some reason, he was not excited at all. It was a very strange feeling. He saw the Volcano Legion being slaughtered crazily, saw his longtime friend Yang Shaoxiong fall down, and saw the Nightmare Legion losing blood crazily. Victory and failure were all in it. But he was not angry, excited, or happy. There was only a kind of indescribable sadness and bewilderment. Even now, he still couldn't understand why things had turned out this way, and what was the meaning of all this. He glanced at Gu Qianchuan. Gu Qianchuan was staring at the screen. His eyes were bright, and he was full of interest. As expected, it is the trump card of the Heavy Armor Legion of the Beijiang military region. Its firepower is really powerful. He turned to look at Lin Dongzi and said approvingly. Lin Dongzi forced a smile and did not speak. How long will it take for the main battle tanks to arrive? Gu Qianchuan suddenly asked. Lin Dongzi thought for a moment and operated on the screen in front of him. The picture was switched to the desert topographic map. He looked at it and said, "It will take about 8 minutes." "Well, 8 minutes," Gu Qianchuan nodded. "Is it about the same time for the Ambition team?" It was not close to the center of Beijiang. With the speed of the Ambition team, the fighters should arrive earlier than the main battle tanks, but not too early. At most, there would be a difference of about 1 minute. Artillery fire was still being fired in the base. In at most 8 minutes, the Nightmare Legion, which was left with only a few hundred people, would be besieged by hundreds of main battle tanks and armored vehicles. Above them, there was still a full complement of 12 fighter jets bombing non-stop. Gu Qianchuan's smile became more obvious. Looking at the diminishing number of Nightmare Legion on the screen, he muttered to himself, "How are you going to survive?" "Pass down my order. All main battle tanks and armored vehicles are to split up and advance at full speed. I need the most powerful firepower." He stood up and left the command room. "Where is your highness going?" Lin Dong followed him subconsciously. Gu Qianchuan paused for a moment and turned to look at Lin Dongzi. His smile was a little weird. "Li Tianlan may not come. As for the Nightmare Legion, if they can survive the siege of main battle tanks and fighter jets, I will personally send them to hell." Lin Dong, on the other hand, opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Gu Qianchuan walked out of the command room and subconsciously reached out to touch the setting sun in his hand. Lin Fengting's figure was already far away from the edge of the desert. He kept adjusting his direction and accelerating. He could already see the ruins and corpses left behind by the Yellow Sand Army. He sprinted as fast as he could and had already reached the outermost defense line of the desert. As the strongest man in the Dark World today, he was indeed very fast. But no matter how fast he was, he could not be faster than fighter jets. Even if Ambition's fighter jets were not the most advanced models, their speed was still beyond Lin Fengting's reach. As the sun set in the west, the dazzling rays dyed the entire desert a fiery red. Lin Fengting, who was marching, suddenly raised his head and looked at the sky. He watched helplessly as the 12 fighter jets spread out in formation and swooped over his head, directly cutting into the distant battlefield. Lin Fengting stood in place and was silent for a while. The distance of dozens of kilometers was not short for him. But for the fighter jets, it was instantaneous. He was the old patriarch of the Lin clan. The Lin clan stood aloof from worldly affairs. Strictly speaking, Lin Yuxian was just a branch of the Lin clan. Therefore, in the face of Lin Yuxian's situation, he had never said anything. It was the other branches of the Lin clan who spoke. But the fact that he could appear here already showed his attitude. Lin Fengting did not know if he could make it in time. But as he stood in this desert, He had already made up his mind. If something really happened to Lin Yuxian, he would go straight to Kunlun City with his sword no matter what and kill everyone in Kunlun City. Lin Yuxian's eyes were cold, and he continued to move forward. His body moved, and then he suddenly turned his head, looking behind him. There was only the setting sun and the glow in the sky behind. At an unknown distance, there seemed to be an unimaginable sharpness approaching at an unimaginable speed. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes. A small black spot appeared in the farthest distance of his sight. Even with his power, he did not know whether the small black spot existed. It was too far away and looked like an illusion. But the next moment, the small black spot suddenly became clear. The sharpness tore the world in an instant. It was still far away. In Lin Fengting's line of sight, that pitch-black dot had transformed into an incomparably ostentatious arc of light. Lin Fengting suddenly opened his eyes wide. Gu Qianchuan's figure left the base of the fierce tiger armored core. He held the setting sun in his hand. Without any warning, the setting sun in his hand suddenly trembled. It seemed to be excited and trembling. In Lin Fengting's sight above the desert, the meteor-like arc of light in the distance passed the city and rushed straight into the desert. At the same time, in the desert prison, sitting in the room, Li Tianlan, whose body had almost become a statue, suddenly opened his eyes. Chapter 872. Taking a step forward was hell. Taking a step back was also hell. 15 minutes after the defeat of the Volcano Legion, the Nightmare Legion finally saw the steel torrent of the fierce tiger-armored legion at the extreme distance. How powerful was the firepower of an ace-level heavy armor legion? Everyone in the Nightmare Legion felt that they had seen it before. They had seen the long-range firepower coverage of the heavy armor legion. But they had not seen the steel torrent of the heavy armor legion. The main battle tanks and armored vehicles were charging at the forefront in a majestic manner. All-terrain vehicles equipped with various super-heavy firepower followed slowly. Self-propelled artillery, howitzers, automatic missile systems, rocket launchers, and armed helicopters that kept rising in altitude. The mountains and plains were everywhere. Countless heavy firepower appeared in the desert. The artillery inside the base of the fierce tiger-armored legion was still roaring. There was no hesitation. When the Nightmare Legion saw the steel torrent found them at the same time. Boom! The deafening explosion became the only sound in the world. Compared with the crazy artillery fire in the base, the steel torrent was more flexible, more accurate, and more destructive. The fire occupied the entire field of vision. The Nightmare Legion had no way to retreat. There was no way to advance. The constantly forming domain was directly smashed the moment it appeared. It could not even do the most basic resistance. The Nightmare Legion, which had lost more than half of its members, was falling almost every moment. The phalanx of hundreds of people was decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. F***CK. At the forefront of the crowd, Li Baiqian's eyes were bloodshot. He roared, "Give up the domain. Let's rush over and kill as many as we can. I can get close to them." Lin Yuxian gritted his teeth and did not speak. Li Baiqian could indeed get close to them. The speed of the Great Void Sword was second to none in the entire Emperor Dong's palace. Not only Li Baiqian, Lin Yuxian and Bai Yuming could also get close to the large steel torrent. But it would take time. This period of time might be very short. But once they left the formation of the Nightmare Legion, the constantly forming domain could no longer be supported. This also meant that the other elites of the Nightmare Legion would be unreservedly exposed to the overwhelming artillery fire. How long would it take for them to get close to the steel torrent? 3 minutes? Or 5 minutes? In the current situation, as long as they dared to leave the Nightmare Legion's formation, it wouldn't even take a minute. Dozens of seconds would be enough to destroy everything in the Nightmare Legion. At that time, apart from the 3 of them, no one else would survive. However, if they didn't charge, the elites of the Nightmare Legion would indeed slow down the speed of the 3 of them. If this continued, they would also be annihilated in a few minutes. Should he charge now and cause enough damage to the enemy? Or should he hang on and wait for the so-called miracle? Fighting in a hopeless situation, it seemed that no matter what choice he made, it would be wrong. Our brothers can't die in vain. Li Baiqian's angry roar sounded a little faint in the sound of the explosion. But the meaning of his words was clear. It was already difficult for them to break through the last 2 lines of defense. Failure was right in front of them. But before they failed, They had to make the ferocious tiger armored core pay the price. A heavy price to pay. Lin Yuxian and Bai Yuming were both in the half-step invincible realm. Although Li Baitian had not reached this realm, his combat strength had also exceeded his own realm. The three of them were the strongest, and they were also the ones who had the highest chance of charging into that distant torrent of steel. Lin Yuxian's arm trembled. The sword light went up and down in front of him. His face turned pale for a moment, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Boom! The roaring grenade tore the domain with a long tail flame and directly enveloped Lin Yuxian's body. Everyone's face changed dramatically. In the violent roar, Lin Yuxian's body was lifted into the air and fell heavily. He struggled hard and knelt on one knee in the yellow sand. His whole body was covered with blood. How are you? Sword. The light flickered. Li Baitian directly pulled Lin Yuxian up and carried him on his back. Everything in front of him seemed to explain a problem. Lin Yuxian's injury had reached the point where it could not be suppressed. But the problem was that no one knew when he was injured. Was it the move that tore apart the Volcano Legion, the shattering of land? Or was it on the way to charge under the gunfire? As the Legion commander of the Nightmare Legion, Lin Yuxian had always been at the forefront from the beginning to the end. He had also endured the most intense attacks. Lin Yuxian forced a smile and said in a hoarse voice, "Put me down." Boom! The violent roar suddenly cut through the sky and covered Lin Yuxian's voice. All the elites of the Nightmare Legion raised their heads almost at the same time. The sunset covered the sky. Under the fiery red sky, fighter jets appeared in their field of vision one after another. The fighter jets swooped rapidly. The altitude dropped. Fire. The crazy roar was deafening. There was a lot of smoke around every fighter jet that swooped. The fighter jets that fired with all their might were getting closer and closer. In an instant, hundreds of small missiles roared and smashed into the Nightmare Legion's formation. The powerful machine guns on the fighter jets fired in the air. Bullets rained down like a torrential rain. In the intensive gunfire, the Nightmare Legion could not even launch their domain. Everything happened in a few seconds. The fighter jets swooped and then rose quickly. After the first wave of dives, the size of the entire Nightmare Legion was directly reduced by nearly half. Countless corpses and blood merged with the yellow sand. The entire Nightmare Legion stopped moving. Lin Yuxian lay on Li Baitian's back, looked up at the fighter jets that circled in the air and began to dive again, and laughed. His smile was calm, but his eyes were full of despair. The ammunition is loaded. The second dive is ready at any time. The Ambition Squad is ready. The Nightmare Legion is expected to be wiped out within 3 minutes. The fighter jets were hovering in the air. In the cockpit of the leading fighter jets, clear voices kept ringing. The entire Ambition Squad had adjusted the firepower system of the fighter jets as quickly as possible. Very good. The captain of the Ambition Squad personally controlled the fighter jets. His voice was calm and indifferent. The second dive, ready, 3, 2. Beep, beep, beep. The sharp alarm sounded abruptly. The originally quiet cabin suddenly flashed with a pale red light, which was a signal of imminent danger. The electronic synthesized voice of the fighter's intelligence system sounded abruptly. Unknown flying target found, distance 47,000 meters, matching data. Long-range intercontinental missile, matching rate 35%. Ground-to-air high-explosive missile, matching rate 27%. Nuclear missile, matching rate 3%. Supersonic fighter jet. Matching rate 12%. No matching data. The target cannot be analyzed. Unknown flying target found, distance 20,000 meters, matching data. The faces of the Ambition Squad looked like they had seen a ghost. Only the system's matching speed was extremely fast. In just a few seconds, the unknown flying object had directly closed the distance of more than 20,000 meters. What the hell was this? He suddenly turned his head. The sunset in his sight was incomparably gorgeous. The sunset was infinitely beautiful, but it was close to dusk. Just for a moment in his sight, the whole sky seemed to be turbulent and twisted. The infinite sunset seemed to twist and flow in an instant. The sun was setting. An unimaginably dazzling light appeared in the sky. It carried with it the colors of the sunset, tearing apart the sky and covering the dusk, turning into an unimaginably ostentatious arc. The tail end of the arc was connected to the city, but the front end had flown directly into the desert. Thousands of meters. 10,000 meters. 100,000 meters. Like a shocking rainbow. Unknown flying object found. Distance 12,000 meters. What? Unknown flying object found. Distance. Boom! An earth-shattering loud noise sounded instantly. That ostentatious and presumptuous light flew into the desert, moving forward, tearing the sky and earth, penetrating everything. In the hundreds of years of the dark world, that was the most extreme edge. The distance of tens of thousands of meters was covered in an instant. That light directly tore the fighter planes. At the moment when the violent roar sounded, the 12 fighter planes of the entire Ambition team exploded in an instant. Burning fireballs appeared in the air one after another. The light that seemed to suppress all the colors rushed out of the explosion and flames and went straight forward. The edge ran through the world. In an instant, the entire desert was torn into a huge gully with a depth of nearly 100 meters. Countless artillery fire exploded at the moment when the light moved forward. As soon as the shells in the distance rose, they were directly rolled back by the huge force. Missiles, grenades, rockets, and everything else flew in a flurry. The ray of light flew past the Nightmare Legion and the torrent of steel. The whole world seemed to be still. The explosion was suppressed in an instant. The thick armor was directly split in the air. The steel torrent was torn in an instant. In the extreme silence, there was only a piece of fire burning, but there was no sound. That light flashed away and kept moving forward. Everyone in the Nightmare Legion was dumbfounded. Most people might not know what that light was. But Li Batian and Lin Yuxian were very clear. That was a sword light. A sword light destroyed the Ambition team and the steel torrent in 1 second. It was as easy and casual as a passing sword light. A sword light that was enough to overturn the entire dark world. In the desert prison, Qin Weibai stood in front of the window and looked at the changing sky in the distance. She did not understand martial arts, so she could not see the light or feel the sword energy between heaven and earth. But in the distance, the wind and clouds were changing, and the sunset was turbulent. She could completely imagine the style of that sword. In the prison, Li Tianlan's figure slowly stood up. His body was extremely stiff and slow. As he moved, the joints all over his body were constantly shaking. He took a deep breath, and his figure disappeared in an instant. Outside the fierce tiger armored core, Gu Qianchuan, whose face changed dramatically, had already felt a near-fatal threat before the Ambition team was destroyed. It was completely instinctive. His figure retreated frantically. As soon as he retreated, he held the murderous weapon-setting sun in his hand. His fingers tried to touch the trigger. This movement was fast. But it was too slow. For that sword light, everything was too slow. The moment the fighter plane of the Ambition team exploded, the sword light had come directly to Gu Xingyun. The incredibly sharp edge tore the domain of the invincible realm around Gu Xingyun in an instant. At the same time, it tore the murderous weapon-setting sun in his hand and his body. The fragments of the murderous weapon and the flesh and blood all over the sky suddenly flew. The broken domain of the invincible realm raised a lot of yellow sand. The yellow sand was flying all over the sky. In the headquarters of the fierce tiger armored corps, Commander Lin Dong suddenly stood up with a look of horror. At this moment, in a different place in Zhongzhou State, Hidden Dragon Sea, the army headquarters building, the offices of various members of parliament. All the leaders and giants in Zhongzhou State stood up at the same time. In the surging yellow sand, they could no longer see Gu Qianchuan, the setting sun, or the sword light. Chen Fengqing clenched his fists, supported his body, and stared at the screen in front of him without blinking. Countless yellow sand fell down violently. Everyone could see it clearly through the screen. The surging of the yellow sand became smooth. On the screen, a figure stood in the air. Gu Qianchuan's figure had disappeared. There were only pieces of minced meat on the ground that were condensed with the yellow sand. Li Tianlan stood in the air, his eyes calm. He held a long black sword in his hand. Chapter 873. At this moment, the whole world seemed to be quiet. It was as quiet as a dream. Fierce Tiger Armored Corps. 43rd Army. Hidden Dragon Sea of Zhongzhou State. Military Headquarters Building. There were not many places, but most of the power in Zhongzhou State was concentrated. Everyone who saw this picture kept absolutely quiet. People thought of the light just now. But more people thought of Gu Qianchuan. What was an instant kill? In the hundreds of years of the Dark World, since the Invincible Realm came into being, this could be said to be the fastest battle in which an Invincible Realm expert died. If this was a battle, it was like a battle, but also like a massacre. An instant kill? A second ago, the light was still 10,000 meters away. A second later, Gu Qianquan's body had been torn into countless pieces. This was an expert who had now completely stabilized the Invincible Realm. He was an Invincible Realm expert with a murderous weapon. It was no exaggeration to say that Gu Qianquan in this state was enough to stand at the peak of the Dark World. At least his strongest blow could rival the peak of the Invincible Realm. The light flew over from tens of thousands of meters away, tore the Ambition team, smashed the steel torrent of the entire heavy armor core, tore the domain of the Invincible Realm expert, smashed the murderous weapon, and killed an Invincible Realm expert in an instant. The whole process didn't even take a second. Fast. Gu Qianquan didn't even react from beginning to end. He held the murderous weapon and didn't even have time to fire. It was all like a dream. The commanders of the 43rd Army and the Fierce Tiger Armored Corps saw this picture. All the directors of Zhongzhou State saw this picture. All the members of parliament in Zhongzhou State also saw this picture. There was no joy, no anger, no excitement, no panic. The sword was too fast. Everyone couldn't even come back to their senses. What was that light? And why did Li Tianlan appear here? In different positions, everyone was watching Li Tianlan through the screen. Li Tianlan stood in the air, quiet as if he was not angry at all. The satellite of the Beijiang military region kept adjusting the angle. His face became clearer and clearer. Everyone saw the look in his eyes. Stiff, dull, and dead silent. He seemed to be immersed in his own world and didn't realize what was happening here. He appeared here as if he was unconscious. Unconsciously. Traversed 60 kilometers in an instant? Most of the bigwigs in Zhongzhou State shook their heads hard. They suddenly felt a little absurd, as if they were dreaming. The transparent space was constantly trembling around Li Tianlan. Beams of light appeared under Li Tianlan's feet. Tiny rays of light danced on the yellow sand, gradually moving upwards. The light shone slightly, with a touch of dim yellow, and finally surrounded the black long sword in Li Tianlan's hand. The floating light seemed to be a little hesitant, a little timid, but also full of expectation, lingering on the edge of the sword. The incredible sword tore up Gu Qianquan and also tore the setting sun into the finest powder. The setting sun, which could already fire, still possessed spirituality. The fragments of the murderous weapon slowly floated in the air, increasing in number. The pitch-black Shenyuan blade trembled slightly. Countless faint yellow rays of light attached themselves to the edge of the sword and fused together. Sword intent pervaded the desert. The Shenyuan blade continued to tremble, its radiance growing brighter and brighter. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly, and he seemed to become sober. His entire body gradually became lively, as if he had just woken up from a long period of unconsciousness. It was quiet in the desert. All the gunfire disappeared. Li Tianlan's head shook. He closed his eyes. But he saw the stars all over the sky. The stars were shining, and the moon was bright. His field of vision was flying. He flew to the highest point of the night sky and kept moving forward, as fast as lightning. He flew over the central plains, Yanzhou, and Qin Island. His field of vision became dark and quiet for a moment. Li Tianlan frowned. In the sky full of starlight, the tide rose and fell. He saw the ancestral hall of the Huangfu family, Huangfu Qiushui, and Tianguang sword. Day and night alternated. His field of vision flew away crazily. Strong wind and scorching sun. Thousands of miles of yellow sand. Nightmare core. Li Tianlan opened his eyes. He held the Shenyuan blade, and his eyes became completely clear. He loosened his palm. The Shenyuan blade, which had almost become a part of his body, slowly flowed, turned into liquid, and covered his palm. The black liquid spread along his palm, covered Li Tianlan's whole body, and turned into a gorgeous and complicated black windbreaker. The last afterglow of the setting sun shone on the golden patterns of the black windbreaker, and Li Tianlan's whole body seemed to be glowing. In the air, he took a step forward. The hem of the windbreaker was gently raised. Li Tianlan appeared directly in front of the nightmare core. The ethereal and sharp sword light suddenly pierced over. Li Beitian drew his sword out of instinct. "It's me." Li Tianlan pinched the blade of the great void sword and pressed it down slightly. It was not until this moment that Li Baitian saw Li Tianlan clearly. His palms suddenly trembled, and he opened his mouth, but he could not speak for a while. Long time no see. Lin Yuxian coughed, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and laughed. Li Tianlan looked at Lin Yuxian, whose breath was unstable, and then at Li Baitian and Bai Yuming, who were in a very bad state. His eyes swept over the remaining Nightmare Corps. Almost all the elites of the Nightmare Corps were injured, and the personnel were sparse. The Corps of less than 2,000 people, at this time, had less than 300 people left. This was the strongest combat capability of Emperor Dong's palace. But more than 80% of them were lost in this charge. A scarlet sword light flashed in Li Tianlan's eyes. "Sorry I'm late," he said softly. Boom! The entire Nightmare Corps was boiling. Everyone struggled to stand up and knelt on one knee neatly. "Greetings, Your Highness." There was undisguised excitement on everyone's face. It was the joy of surviving a disaster, as well as the gratitude and fanaticism of surviving a desperate situation. Li Tianlan waved his hand. The surging sword energy pulled everyone up and made them stand straight. His expression was still calm. However, the blood-red sword light in the depths of his eyes continued to brew like a blood-red storm. "What's going on?" Li Tianlan asked aloud. "Because of the termination plan." With his back to Lin Yuxian, Li Baitian said in a hoarse voice, "Chen Fengqing wanted to kill Wang Yuetong, but the plan was exposed. So he directly sent an army to block the desert, just to prevent you from knowing the news. Great Ambition, Fierce Tiger Armored Corps, the 43rd Army, and the 4 lines of defense that we tore apart were all the handiwork of Chen Fengqing and the Beijiang military region." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. His voice was flat and without any ups and downs. "The termination plan. Obviously, they think that Wang Yuetong will be the key between you and the Wang family of Beihai, so..." Lin Yuxian sneered. "It doesn't matter," Li Tianlan said softly. Lin Yuxian was stunned. Li Tianlan did not explain. It really didn't matter. He stood here now and knew the termination plan. So what Chen Fengqing thought was not important at all. What mattered was that Chen Fengqing really blocked the desert prison, really launched the termination plan, and really wanted to imprison him in prison. Emperor Dong's palace made the most resolute counterattack for this. What mattered was that this was a war between Emperor Dong's palace and the Prince Group. What mattered was that Emperor Dong's palace paid a heavy price for this. More than 80% of the elites of the Nightmare Corps were buried in the desert. "This is a war," Li Tianlan said lightly. "Gu Qianchuan is not enough." He glanced at everyone in the Nightmare Corps and said softly, "I will give you an explanation." He slowly turned around and looked in the direction of the Fierce Tiger Armored Corps. The gunfire there had stopped, but the desert was shaking slightly. Behind the Fierce Tiger Armored Corps, the 43rd Army was rushing at full speed. Li Tianlan looked up at the sky. He could not see the satellite in the sky. But as he looked up, everyone in Zhongzhou State who was paying close attention to the battlefield felt that Li Tianlan was looking at them. He twitched the corner of his mouth. In everyone's sight, Li Tianlan raised his palm. "They are all enemies," he said. A sword suddenly sounded between heaven and earth. Li Tianlan's windbreaker suddenly fluttered. The black windbreaker instantly left Li Tianlan's body. Another streak of sword light appeared in the barren desert. The unparalleled sword light seemed to light up in Li Tianlan's hand. The moment the light lit up, there was an earth-shattering roar and explosion 10 kilometers away. The explosion that seemed to overturn the whole desert was endless. Li Tianlan's voice fell. Countless shells exploded in the base of the Fierce Tiger Armored Corps one after another. Thick smoke and raging fire rose in the distance, twisting the space. In the base of the Fierce Tiger Armored Corps, everything turned into a huge mushroom cloud in the explosion. The sword light shuttled all the way forward and rushed directly into the formation of the 43rd Army. Behind the camp of the 43rd Army, the undead, who was excitedly preparing to play a new game with Xiao Mahai, looked up in astonishment. His world was spinning crazily. The blood all over the sky kept spraying with the head flying in the air. The sword light cut off the flagpole. Xiao Mahai's body fell down. The sword light continued to fly and instantly reached the back of the 43rd Army. The sharp edge directly tore the huge tent of the headquarters. Blood and minced meat burst out of the broken tent. The sword light that had been moving forward flashed and came directly to Xiao Mahai. Before Xiao Mahai's body landed, it turned into a windbreaker and put it on him. Chapter 874. What was sword light? That sounded like a load of crap. But in fact, for those who were obsessed with martial arts, especially swordsmanship, this was actually a very interesting question, and it also represented two directions of swordsmanship. There had been debates about this in the dark world, but there had never been an authoritative answer, and it was destined that there could not be an authoritative answer. Different people, different forces, different swordsmanship, different ideas, and everyone's understanding of sword light was different. The so-called sword light. Was it a sword? Or was it light? The former represented sharpness. The latter represented speed. Different martial artists had different answers in their hearts, and their answers were also the direction they were pursuing. In Li Baitian's heart, sword light was light. The great void sword intent was ethereal, unpredictable, agile, and illusory. It looked complicated, but it was extremely pure. The only essence of the great void sword was speed. Li Baitian said a long time ago that he was at the late stage, and the fact did prove it. Before entering the thunder-shocking realm, he was also a genius, but to be honest, he was not very outstanding. He used to rank 4th among the top 10 young experts in Zhongzhou State. At that time, he had not yet entered the fire-flaming realm. And during the period from the fire-flaming realm to the thunder-shocking realm, the great void sword seemed to fade into the crowd. Under the fire-flaming realm, he could still support his height with the foundation of Mount Shu. But in the fire-flaming realm, his weakness had been infinitely magnified. He was not fast enough. And the destructive power of the great void sword intent was not strong. But all this was completely different after entering the thunder-shocking realm. The physical quality that could withstand the power of the thunder-shocking realm could already support the essence of the great void sword. With the thunder-shocking realm as the foundation, Li Baitian's combat capability could be said to grow explosively every time he made progress. The lethality of the great void sword might still not be strong, but its speed was getting faster and faster. Speed. This was everything Li Baitian pursued. From the thunder-shocking realm to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, to the half-step invincible realm, and even to the invincible realm and the peak of the invincible realm. The only thing Li Baitian needed was speed. He didn't need lethality. Extreme speed could completely let him destroy everything. This was his martial arts and belief. When he was in the ice-freezing mirror, Li Baitian was ranked behind Dongqing Rushi on the list of the top 10 young experts. Now Li Baitian, who was already at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, could even suppress Dongqing Rushi, who was in the same realm as him. In this state, Li Baitian's supreme void was enough to make most of the experts in the same realm as him have no time to react. Correspondingly, the Shushan Nirvana sword had a completely opposite concept. Before Wei Kunlun entered the invincible realm, the sword light in his eyes was a sword. Therefore, regardless of whether he was a saint or a Nirvana sword master, his sword was extremely heavy, majestic and mighty. These two paths practically represented two general directions of the sword Dao, and they were equally matched. That was what Li Baitian had always thought. Until he saw the sword light. That almost unimaginable sword light. 10,000 meters in the blink of an eye. Indestructible and unstoppable. In an instant, it destroyed the Ambition battle team, destroyed the Heavy Armor Legion, killed the Invincible Realm, and tore apart the murderous weapon. In an instant, it rushed into the base of the ferocious Tiger Armored Corps and the military formation of the 43rd Army. That was unimaginable speed and unimaginable sharpness. It was not until the light brought Xiao Mahai back to Li Tianlan that the first explosion sounded in the distance of the ferocious Tiger Armored Corps. No human could do that. Li Baitian could be sure of that. However, the sword chi and the sword light seemed to show Li Baitian a new direction. What was sword light? Sword light was sword light. Compromise was not the only thing that could take care of everything. There was also perfection. The black windbreaker wrapped around Xiao Mahai reappeared in front of Li Tianlan. The black windbreaker slowly unfurled, bringing with it a soft curtain of light. Light. The curtain floated in the air, motionless and extremely stable. The windbreaker fell off Xiao Mahai and was put on Li Tianlan again. Xiao Mahai lay on the light curtain, motionless. Li Tianlan quietly looked at Xiao Mahai, who was in a coma. His eyes were getting colder and colder. Tianlan. Li Baitian hesitated for a moment before calling out. Li Tianlan didn't move. Li Beitian looked at the windbreaker that gradually turned into a cloak on him and said seriously, "What the hell is this?" A corner of the black cloak was raised. The sword energy fell softly on the yellow sand. It seemed that someone had put a pen on the ground. Two big words appeared in the yellow sand. It was like Li Tianlan's handwriting, but every stroke was sharper than Li Tianlan's. Ruthless? Li Beitian raised his eyebrows slightly. It had many names. Shenyuan Feng. 13-story building. Shenyuan sword. But now in this state. That's its name. Li Tianlan said quietly. In the building of the army headquarters, Dongqing Wudi's body slowly relaxed. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. That's how it should be. It's good to die. Damn. It's comfortable. On the sofa in the office, Bai Qingzhao kept adjusting the screen and muttered to himself, with undisguised excitement and relaxation. He was still watching the scene when the sword light left Li Tianlan's palm. On the screen, Li Tianlan raised his palm. The sword light disappeared in a flash. The base of the fierce tiger armored core suddenly lit up with a large fire. The sword light rushed into the military formation of the 43rd Army without any pause. The charging formation of the 43rd Army didn't react at all, and the sword light had flown straight along the center of the military formation. Flesh and blood were flying all over the sky. The sword light had reached the rear of the 43rd Army. The flagpole hanging Xiaoma high was cut off. At the same time the flagpole was broken, the sword light had cut the undead and appeared in the tent of the headquarters. The scene in that moment was too fast. Ouyang Pengfei, the commander of the 43rd Army, seemed to raise his hand. Then the figures of the officers of the 43rd Army who were discussing countermeasures and several experts of Kunlun City disappeared completely. The tent was completely torn apart. There was only blood left in the tent. When the explosion sounded, the sword light had brought Xiaoma Hai back to Li Tianlan's side. Fast. It all happened too fast. How fast was it? The most advanced military satellite in the sky could only capture a light. The light shuttled back and forth, and the whole process was just a blink of an eye. Bai Qingzhao fixed this second, slowed it down, decomposed it, and finally turned it into a video of about 7 or 8 seconds. Everything happened too fast. Being able to break it down into 7 or 8 seconds was already the limit of a satellite. He stared at the sword light without blinking. The speed of the sword light in the video was completely constant. It flew across the sky, passed through the crowd, and tore apart the gunpowder warehouse of the armored army. Everything is constant. There was no acceleration or deceleration during the entire process. It was as if everything in its path didn't exist, and all obstacles were torn apart in an instant. It was so stable and majestic that it made one's scalp go numb. All right. Bai Qingzhao slapped his thigh and shouted. Dongqing Wudi, watch your attitude. He sat up straight and looked at Bai Qingzhao with a serious expression. His tone was meaningful. Bai Qingzhao was a little puzzled, but he immediately understood. He put down the remote control in his hand, nodded and said, yes. Dongqing Wudi pointed to the screen. Everyone who sacrificed in the desert today, every soldier, whether in the north or the south, whether it's the border military or the Nightmare Legion, everyone is a hero, a martyr. No one deserves to die. They may not be innocent, but they are not the ones who should be responsible for it. Everyone who sacrificed in the desert today is worthy of the title of Zhongzhou State Soldier. No matter who is responsible for everything today, they are all heroes. Dongqing Wudi said slowly. I see. Bai Qingzhao took a deep breath and nodded. Are you relieved now? Dongqing Wudi chuckled. Bai Qingzhao also smiled. He lay on the sofa and looked at the ceiling, motionless. If you can still move now, come with me. Dongqing Wudi said. Where to? Bai Qingzhao sat up straight. Beijiang. Dongqing Wudi's tone was calm. The army headquarters should have an attitude towards everything that happened today. Many people in Zhongzhou State also needed to know the attitude of the army headquarters. He looked at Li Tianlan on the screen and felt a little emotional. From the moment he entered the desert prison, the giant group had been under pressure from the outside world during the internal shuffle. Now it was time to fight back. Let's go. Without saying anything, Bai Qingzhao directly picked up the coat on the sofa. Dongqing Wudi walked out of the office. Tell me. Bai Qingzhao followed Dongqing Wudi. He hesitated and said slowly, "Has Tianlon entered the invincible realm now? Does it matter?" Dongqing Wudi laughed. "Whether he has entered the invincible realm or not, from today on, the era of Emperor Dong's palace has officially arrived." Xiao Mahai was still in a coma. No one knew how long he had been caught by Gu Qianchuan. But at this moment, there was almost no intact place on his body. The sword energy turned into a cloud and dragged him. Li Tianlon stood in front of him. Countless water-like sword chi flowed out of his hand, slowly wrapping Xiao Mahai inside layer by layer. It took a long time. Xiao Mahai became more and more blurred in the sword energy. He looked like a transparent rice dumpling, or amber. After doing all this, Li Tianlon gently waved his hand and said, "Send him to the hospital, stabilize his injury, and then send him to Yuzhou." "Let me do it, Your Highness." Fairytale, who was a little pale, took a step forward and steadily carried the sword energy amber on his back. Li Tianlon glanced at him. He had never seen Fairytale before, but he knew of his existence. Looking at his face, Li Tianlon asked, "How are you?" "I can still hold on. I'll take General Xiao to the hospital first." Fairytale smiled. His smile was a little ugly, and his voice was a little hoarse. "Just now before you came, Fairytale's cousin sacrificed himself," Li Beitian whispered. Li Tianlon was silent for a moment. He reached out and patted Fairytale on the shoulder, whispering, "Go first." Fairytale nodded and quickly left with the amber on his back. Li Tianlon turned his head and looked at the nightmare troupe behind him. All the members of the nightmare troupe were standing. In the direction they came from, corpses were scattered in the desert. As the wind rose and fell, they were slowly drowned by the yellow sand. "They can't be here." Li Tianlon stared at the scene in front of him. "Find all the brothers and send them back to Tiannan." His figure flickered and carefully dug out a corpse of the nightmare troupe that was gradually drowned. The people of the nightmare troupe were stunned. Li Tianlon didn't look up. He said lightly, "Send all the brothers who sacrificed themselves home. You, come with me to take revenge." The explanation was for his own people. Li Tianlon didn't need to explain to the enemy. The hatred was so obvious in front of him. He only needed revenge. What explanation did he need? He could do whatever he wanted. Chapter 875. The corpses were sorted out one by one. Li Tianlon suddenly raised his head. A loud rumble rang out in the distant sky. The silhouette of the fighter appeared in his line of sight from afar. The fighter continued to increase in altitude, but it did not approach. Instead, it drew an arc in the air and began to return. Li Tianlon silently watched the fighter plane disappear and said nothing. The black cloak was draped over his body, and he did not make any unnecessary movements. The Beijiang military region still hasn't given up? Lin Yuxian, with a pale face, carried the corpses with Li Tianlon. He was seriously injured. Li Tianlon could clearly feel his weakness, but he still held on and found the corpses of his subordinates one by one. Apart from the heavily injured, the entire nightmare army was on the move. The 6 defensive lines of the blockade were all part of their search area. Li Beitian, who was in the best condition, brought some people to the area of the special forces in the wasteland. Bai Yuming was in the middle with a group of people. Li Tianlon and the seriously injured Lin Yuxian led a group of people to look for the dead on the road from the volcano core to the tiger armored core. This section of the road was the shortest, but the number of people who died was also the highest. It's not the Beijiang military district. Li Tianlon shook his head. They are from the Air Force. Li Tianlon shook his head. Beijiang can't mobilize that type of fighter jet. He Donglai? Lin Yuxian said thoughtfully. So they are allies. So we'll be able to send our brothers back soon. Li Tianlon said softly. His voice was calm and emotionless. It was a state of extreme repression. It was faint, but it was cold enough to make one's scalp go numb. There were less than 300 survivors in the Nightmare Legion out of 1,600 people. For Li Tianlon and Emperor Dong's palace, this was an unbearable loss. He was nurturing his sword in the desert prison. All his thoughts were immersed in swordsmanship. In that state, the concept of time became very vague. For him, it was like he had just woken up from a long trance. As soon as he opened his eyes, Someone told him that the top combat power of Emperor Dong's palace had been reduced by more than half. But the one who attacked was not an enemy. He had his own ideas and ambitions, but from the beginning to the end, he had never placed Zhongzhou State as an enemy. Someone who wasn't his enemy had almost destroyed everything he had. If Heartless had come a little later. If he had awoken a little later. A few minutes late. The entire Nightmare Legion would be annihilated. Lin Yuxian, by Yu Ming, Li Beitian. Everyone will die here. What would be left of Emperor Dong's palace at that time? How could he face the Lin clan, Mount Shu, the Bai family, and even the giant group in the future? Li Tianlan pursed his lips tightly. His body trembled slightly. Countless emotions surged in his heart. There was fear, joy, anger, hatred, but most of all, there was a brutal desire to tear everything apart. All the emotions were stuck in his chest, making it hard for him to breathe. The cloak draped over him clearly felt Li Tianlan's killing intent. The huge cloak trembled slightly, and the hem of the cloak fluttered, turning back into a huge pitch-black sword. Li Tianlan held the hilt, closed his eyes, and remained silent for a long time. "What's your plan?" Lin Yuxian seemed to understand something. He looked at the pitch-black Shenyuan Feng and asked softly, "An eye for an eye." Li Tianlan let go of the sword in his hand and let the huge sword float beside him. Once again, he suppressed the emotions in his heart. "That's the Prime Minister." Lin Yuxian looked at Li Tianlan seriously. "Really?" Li Tianlan asked faintly in reply. Lin Yuxian's body shook, and his scalp was really numb at this moment. Everyone has to pay the price. Everyone involved in this matter will be counted as one. No one will be able to escape. Li Tianlan and Lin Yuxian found the corpses of the dead and put them together. His eyes became calmer and calmer. "They have to pay the price." He kept muttering to himself, "They have to pay the price." The sun set completely. A gust of wind blew in the desert. The wind blew the yellow sand and quickly took away the temperature of the desert. Li Tianlan slowly raised his head and looked into the distance. A sword light appeared in the distance. The sword light wrapped the outline of a human figure and kept approaching Li Tianlan's position. Li Tianlan stood where he was, motionless. The sword light stopped in front of Li Tianlan. The outline in the light gradually became clear, revealing Lin Fengting's somewhat complicated face. He silently looked at the surrounding desert and the neatly gathered corpses. After a long silence he whispered, "I'm late. This is a matter between Emperor Dong's palace and the Prince Group." Li Tianlan shook his head. "At most, the Wang family of Beihai has nothing to do with the Lin clan. I didn't say it out of anger." Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows and glanced at Lin Yuxian. Lin Yuxian nodded slightly. Although time was limited, there were some things he still had to say in the process of sorting out the corpses. For example, Chen Fengqing and the Prince Group, the termination plan, the current blockade plan, and even how the war started after the Nightmare Troop arrived in the desert. So Li Tianlan directly targeted the Prince Group. "What's your plan?" Lin Fengting asked the same question that Lin Yuxian had just asked, which was exactly the same question. Li Tianlan's answer was exactly the same. "An eye for an eye." He lowered his head and moved forward step by step, looking for the corpses under the yellow sand in the darkening dusk. "Don't be impulsive." Lin Fengting frowned. "You know what Chen Fengqing means to Zhongzhou State?" "Yes, I know." Li Tianlan bent down, picked up a corpse, and walked back. He said slowly, "But now it seems that no one knows what he means to Zhongzhou State. I'll let them know." He carefully put down the corpse. "I said before I entered the desert that I was the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. It seems that no one took my words seriously, so I don't need to take them seriously. This time, I won't go too far, and no one is qualified to ask me to focus on the overall situation." He pointed to the dense corpses in front of him. His fingers trembled in the last twilight, and his voice also trembled. "My overall situation. My overall situation was broken by them." Lin Fengting looked at Li Tianlan's trembling fingers and was silent for a while. Then he whispered, "The dark world has been a little chaotic recently. To some extent, it seems to have something to do with the Prince Group. This time, the Prince Group can use at least 5 invincible realm experts to target Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace. You know what I mean." 5 invincible realm experts? Li Tianlan's voice was a little indifferent. I'm talking about at least. Lin Fengting's tone was serious. How many invincible realm experts can there be in the entire dark world now? This blockade operation is just the beginning. Next, there will be the final battle in Beihai. It's hard for Situ Tsongyue and Saint to take action in this battle. The Dark Knights are in a mess now. I can't participate in the final battle either. The Wang family of Beihai does have a trump card, but unless you don't participate in the final battle in Beihai, it's very likely that you will face at least 5 or even more invincible realm experts alone. But now things have developed to this point. If you don't stand on Beihai's side, it's impossible to replace Kunlun City. It has nothing to do with what I'm going to do. Li Tianlan said blandly, whether I do it or not, the final battle in Beihai will happen eventually. There will be many invincible realm experts. If there are only 5 invincible realm experts, I can deal with them. Because of Ruthless? Lin Fengting gestured to Shen Yuanfeng, who was floating beside Li Tianlan. If you join forces with it, you can indeed deal with 5 invincible realm experts. In Ruthless' current state, you can even deal with double the number. But how long can Ruthless last in this state? In other words, if Ruthless can't stay with you, what can you do to deal with them? I didn't say it. Li Tianlan looked at Lin Fengting. I mean 5 invincible realm experts. I can deal with them. Lin Fengting. Lin Yuxian. Invincible realm. Li Tianlan looked at Lin Fengting. You're also afraid of death. The father and son looked at Li Tianlan in a daze and couldn't speak for a while. What realm are you in now? Lin Fengting took a deep breath. He seemed to feel a little ridiculous, and his tone was full of disbelief. Invincible realm? No. Li Tianlan said quietly. The night slowly enveloped the desert. Li Tianlan raised his hand and snapped his fingers. An extremely gentle light appeared in the darkness. The light jumped in his hand and instantly covered the desert with a radius of hundreds of meters. The light was like thunder, like flames, and like pure sword light. In the light, Li Tianlan looked at Lin Fengting. It doesn't matter whether I'm in the invincible realm or not. He said blandly, the important thing is that even if I don't enter the invincible realm, I'm invincible in the dark world now. Not in the invincible realm, but in the invincible realm. Lin Fengting felt the light around him and the sword energy around him, and his face changed little by little. Li Tianlan didn't hide any details. The light in front of him was soft. But with Lin Fengting's realm, he could naturally see the abnormality. He could feel the state of this sword energy. He could also feel Li Tianlan's state at the moment when he made his move. His face kept changing, extremely complicated, and finally turned into undisguised admiration. Amazing. He said softly. Heresy. Li Tianlan shook his head. Lin Fengting laughed. He really didn't expect that Li Tianlan would take such a path during the time when he kept the sword in the desert. At his age, he was destined not to enter the invincible realm. Therefore the path before him was undoubtedly the best one. Heresy is also a path, he said softly. Li Tianlan didn't speak. His eyes crossed the desert and looked at the night sky in the distance. In silence, his eyes were full of blood light. Chapter 876. The movement of the Nightmare Legion was not fast, nor could it be. It was not easy to find more than 1,000 corpses in a 40-kilometer battle line, and as time passed, the elites who had been sacrificed at the beginning had been completely buried by the yellow sand, making the search even more difficult. The most important thing was manpower. In such a large area with so many corpses, Emperor Dong's palace could only send 300 people to search. Lin Fengting stared blankly at the increasing number of corpses in front of him. The Nightmare Army was the main force in breaking through the blockade. To be exact, his son, Lin Yuxian, was the leader. All the orders were issued by Lin Yuxian. That included giving up on sorting out their comrades' corpses. He did not feel that the Nightmare Army was cold-blooded and did not care about the corpses of their comrades. Instead, this action showed the determination of the Nightmare Army. No one cleaned up the corpses of their comrades because no one planned to go back alive. Specks of light covered the vast desert. The night in the desert was beautiful and stunning. The hazy and bright light of the moon and stars quietly sprinkled on the desert, blending with the sword chi that illuminated the desert. It was dreamy and warm. Wisps of sword intent seemed to have merged with the desert. The light within hundreds of meters kept moving. Li Tianlan alone found corpses in the yellow sand and went further and further. Lin Fengting watched all this quietly and suddenly looked back at Lin Yuxian sitting next to him. Lin Yuxian's face was pale and bloodless. His aura fluctuated continuously, fluctuating between high and low. He had just used the recovery potion of the Lin clan. With the effect of the potion, unimaginable exhaustion filled his whole body. After the tension in his heart was released, he only felt weak. Is it worth it? Lin Fengting suddenly asked. What? Lin Yuxian shook his head hard and looked at his father. Everything. Lin Fengting asked. There was everything, including everything. Was it all worth it? Was it worth it for the Nightmare Army to turn out in full strength to fight against Zhongzhou State and break the blockade? Was it worth it to lose more than half of the Nightmare Legion? Facing tens of thousands of soldiers and countless cannons, was it worth it for everyone to charge with the courage to die? As the heir of the Lin clan, was it worth it to give up the identity of heir and become a branch to rebuild Zhuanyuantai? Was it worth risking his life for Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace? It was not that he had no other choice. Lin Yuxian had a choice. He had many choices. But he didn't choose anything. Was it worth it? Lin Yuxian was silent for a long time before he said softly, "The Nightmare Core must appear here. The most important thing for Emperor Dong's palace to develop to this stage is momentum. In any case, this momentum cannot be suppressed at all." For the sake of Shenyuan City, Tianlan wiped out the whole Qi family. He had a standpoint, but he was also at fault first. 2 years in the desert is nothing. But this time is different. Plan termination was Chen Fengqing's mistake. Or rather, it was his own stupidity. He did something wrong, but after it was exposed, he sealed off the desert prison? Why? From the beginning to the end, Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace were right. However, Zhongzhou State blocked the news in an extremely tough manner and tried to suppress Emperor Dong's palace. He was too optimistic. I dare say that if Emperor Dong's palace tolerated it this time, regardless of what the outside world would think, Chen Fengqing would be even more insatiable in the future. So the Nightmare Core must appear here. No matter what, even if everyone dies here, we must charge. Emperor Dong's palace is not a place that can be easily bullied. Lin Fengting took a deep look at his son and said with a smile, "Besides this, what else? Your identity is different." Lin Yuxian looked at the neatly arranged corpses around him. He reached out and held the palm of one of the corpses. The thick palm was extremely cold and stiff. He still remembered the name of this brother. He was from Suzhou and had mediocre qualities. But he was obsessed with martial arts and was also one of the thorns of the Nightmare Core. He was an expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. When he was in Tiannan, he liked to learn from others when he had nothing to do. He even asked Lin Yuxian for help. When facing the artillery fire all over the sky, he tried his best to cooperate with Lin Yuxian to support the pseudo-domain. He was the first expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm to die under the artillery fire. Lin Yuxian held his palm quietly. After a long time he whispered, "It's the same." Lin Fengting sighed and shook his head. He patted him on the shoulder and said in a low voice, "It's good to be alive." Lin Yuxian did not speak. Lin Fengting slowly reached out and grabbed a handful of yellow sand. The subtle light merged with the yellow sand and was held in his hand at the same time. Lin Fengting quietly looked at the shining yellow sand in his hand. After a long silence he sighed softly and said, "The prince group is finished." Lin Fengting froze and looked at his father in astonishment. He heard it very clearly. What Lin Fengting said was that the prince group was finished. It was not that Chen Fengqing was finished. If the individual and the whole were shown in Zhongzhou State, it would be a completely different situation. If Chen Fengqing was finished, there would be no change in the current situation. After all, he was a person who was about to retire. But if the prince group collapsed, the entire Zhongzhou State would fall into a violent turmoil. Is it so serious? Lin Yuxian frowned. Lin Fengting pinched the sand in his hand, and a faint light flowed in his hand. It looked very gentle, even warm, but he could only feel an almost insane killing intent from the extremely subtle sword qi. It came from Li Tianlan's killing intent. "Emperor Dong's palace," he whispered. Looking at the whole dark world, All resources are limited, especially power resources. In a relatively balanced environment, the rise of a behemoth does not mean the weakening of other forces of the same level. It is more likely to mean the disappearance of another behemoth. It's a good opportunity right now, even the only opportunity. And Tianlan is already qualified. Lin Youxian's mood was a little complicated. He thought of what Li Tianlan had just said. Even if I haven't entered the invincible realm, I am invincible in the current dark world. When he said this, Li Tianlan's voice was very soft, but with absolute confidence. If there is no ruthlessness, Lin Youxian hesitated and whispered, to what extent can Tianlan do? He believed that Li Tianlan could indeed defeat everyone in the dark world with Shen Yuan Feng. Especially in the current state of Shen Yuan Feng. The sword that tore the sky just now was enough to explain the problem. That kind of extremely powerful sword energy could sweep across the entire dark world without Li Tianlan's help. In this state, Shen Yuan Feng was ruthless. But he could not always be ruthless. Shen Yuan Feng was Shen Yuan Feng. No matter how many murderous weapons were combined, in essence, Shen Yuan Feng was always a murderous weapon. It could also be said to be a life, but it was a life supported by endless energy. On the other hand, the energy that Shen Yuan Feng needed would take a long time to accumulate. Now ruthlessness was a murderous weapon that had been fully charged. It could burst out the power to destroy the world at any time. Compared with other murderous weapons, the only difference was that it was more complete and could use its power more rationally. When other murderous weapons opened fire, they would completely burst out the accumulated energy. But ruthlessness was a murderous weapon that could continue to burst out. But no matter how much it continued to burst out, its energy was limited. The sword just now was destined to consume a lot of ruthlessness's energy, and part of this energy would be made up by setting Sunday. But anyway, as long as ruthlessness burst out, it was impossible to achieve a real balance. It would also fall into silence. After all the energy was used up, it would continue to replenish energy. At that time, ruthlessness would still have a will, but without energy, it was just Shen Yuan Feng, just a sword. Li Tianlan could sweep the dark world with ruthlessness. But after sweeping the dark world, ruthlessness became Shen Yuan Feng, and Li Tianlan was still Li Tianlan. How strong was Li Tianlan now without the help of external objects? Lin Youxian smiled and said, before he entered the desert, there was a saying in the dark world. With the 13-story building, he was the #1 expert in the dark world besides me. But that was the sword formation of the 13-story building. What if there was no sword formation? Lin Youxian frowned. Why don't you ask yourself how strong you will be without a sword? Or how strong you will be if you lose your hands? Lin Fengting laughed. He reached out and touched his son's head. The 13-story building is a sword formation and also a sword, but it can't be said to be an external object. In the final analysis, the so-called external object is ruthlessness after it has accumulated enough energy. Without energy, the 13-story building and Shen Yuan Feng are cold weapons, just like the sword in your hand. The sword formation of the 13-story building is not important. The important thing is that Tianlan can use it. It is his own understanding and kendo to drive the 13-story building. It is his own ability and his own sword formation. Of course, it can also be regarded as his own combat capability. In other words, if you ask me how strong I am now, do you want to ask me how strong I am without the 24 moves of sword? Lin Youxian scratched his head. Lin Fengting turned to look at Li Tianlan's back, narrowed his eyes and whispered. During this time, he can be said to be cultivating swords in the desert prison, but to be exact, he is studying the sword formation of the 13-story building and finding the most suitable method. Now the sword formation of the 13-story building can be said to be his own sword formation. Lin Youxian was a little hesitant. He shook his head, changed the direction, and asked directly, Dad, is he your opponent now? Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes and thought seriously for a long time. His expression was a little dignified. He slowly shook his head and said, It's hard to say. The word hard to say could represent many things, but the most intuitive meaning was that Lin Fengting was not sure. Lin Youxian took a deep breath, opened his eyes wide, and looked at Li Tianlan. It was not until this moment that he really understood Li Tianlan's current level. He smiled bitterly and muttered to himself, How is this possible? He was not arrogant, nor did he belittle himself. Lin Yuxian always felt that no matter who he compared with, he would not be too bad. Even if Li Tianlan had led him a lot in terms of combat capability, the actual distance between the two would not be too far. But now, the extremely clear facts were in front of him. Li Tianlan's level had far exceeded the younger generation and was even infinitely close to his father. How did he do it? You are no longer in the invincible realm. Lin Yuxian's tone was a little excited. Lin Fengting was indeed seriously injured now. But he had officially broken through the peak of the invincible realm and was only half a step away from the supreme realm. And Li Tianlan had not yet entered the invincible realm. How was this possible? Are you hit? Lin Fengting looked at Lin Yuxian with a faint smile. Lin Yuxian was muddle-headed and shook his head with a bitter smile. He only felt that his injury seemed to be a little worse. In the normal state, he is still not my opponent. After all, Tianlan has not really entered the invincible realm. The unorthodox way he said is equivalent to a trick. His current state is relatively special. How strong his combat capability is depends on his physical coordination. Physical coordination? Lin Yuxian was stunned. Lin Fengting nodded. That is balance. Lin Yuxian did not speak. Balance. He shook his head and thought that this should be what the Lin clan and the Li family were best at. Chapter 877. The night was getting darker. The glimmer of light in the desert was constantly expanding. The corpses of the nightmare army were found one by one. 100, 500, 1,000. Li Tianlan walked farther and farther. The corpses of the dead were neatly placed together. Countless lights shone around the corpses, isolating all the wind and sand. Tianlan. In the slight sound of footsteps, Li Baiqian's figure came from afar. I'm done over there. Li Tianlan nodded and carefully dug out a corpse that was almost completely buried by the yellow sand. Give me a hand. Li Baiqian bent down and lifted the corpse's legs. He said in a low voice. What should we do now? He was responsible for sorting out the corpses at the forefront of the battle line. There were fewer dead in that distance, so it was relatively easier to find them. But even so, it was still an unbearable number if measured by human lives. How could more than 1,000 corpses be sent back to Tiannan in an area of tens of kilometers? This position was more than 100 kilometers away from the nearest city in Beijiang. And the culprit of all this was the Beijiang military region. Beijiang had not even cleaned up the corpses of its own people, let alone come to Emperor Dong's palace. How could the bodies of more than 1,000 dead elites be sorted out across thousands of kilometers to Tiannan? The Air Force will find a way. Li Tianlan thought of the latest fighter jet he had seen not long ago and shook his head. If not, we'll send them in batches. The nearest province to Beijiang was Suzhou province. Under the situation that Beijiang was watching, the Air Force could only mobilize the Suzhou Air Force if they wanted to intervene. But it was a desert, and large transport planes could not land at all. Even if they could land, they could not take off again. So the only choice was to send the bodies to Suzhou by helicopter, and then send them to Tiannan by transport plane from Suzhou. I'll stay here. You send the brothers home. Li Tianlan said, count all their identities and compensate them as much as possible. Don't worry, leave it to me. Li Baiqian nodded. Li Tianlan nodded. The faint light continued to extend, and the sword energy slowly pushed forward. Soon, he found another corpse. Li Baiqian hesitated and was about to say something. In the distant night, a dazzling light suddenly shone over. Li Tianlan stopped bending down, straightened up, and squinted at the night sky in the distance. The rotors whistled from far to near. 2 armed helicopters slowly approached Li Tianlan. The dazzling searchlights swept across the desert unscrupulously. The approaching helicopter kicked up a strong gust of wind. As if on purpose, 2 helicopters slowly hovered above Li Tianlan's head. The people in the helicopter did not speak. Only the searchlight kept sweeping Li Tianlan's body. Li Baiqian raised his head and looked at the symbol of the Northern Frontier Army on the helicopter. He looked at the searchlights that kept sweeping over, and his face darkened. In the cabin of the helicopter, a middle-aged man in a military uniform looked down at Li Tianlan expressionlessly and said nothing. The dazzling light was aimed directly at Li Tianlan's eyes, and the strong light shrouded his whole body. Heh! Li Tianlan laughed. He raised his palm. There was no hesitation, no fear. An extremely sharp sword light suddenly bloomed in his palm. The sword light rushed up into the sky, and as it continued to extend, it directly turned into a huge sword that was over 100 meters tall. The sharp light illuminated the sky, and the huge sword did not stop as it directly chopped down. F***CK, land. In the leading helicopter, the middle-aged man's face suddenly changed. The blade of the huge sword flashed away in the air. Boom! In the violent roar, the fuselage of the second helicopter exploded in an instant, and a strong flame rose in the air. The searchlights disappeared. Li Tianlan waved his hand. The awe-inspiring sword energy flew in his hand. A helicopter. Before the wreckage and fire of the helicopter landed on the ground, they had been completely smashed into pieces by the sword energy. The helicopter, the fire, and the people on the helicopter all disappeared. The corner of Li Baitian's mouth twitched. He did not speak, but just walked to Li Tianlan's side. The helicopter slowly descended. Before it completely landed, the cabin door had been violently pulled open. Li Tianlan. In a furious roar, the middle-aged man jumped directly from the helicopter and roared furiously, "Do you know what you are doing?" Li Tianlan looked at him expressionlessly. The man was about in his early 50s. His military uniform was neat, and his momentum was majestic and domineering. The faint light of the desert illuminated his epaulets. The rank of lieutenant general was shining in the night. A large number of military medals hung on his chest, making him look iron-blooded and majestic. Li Baiqian's eyes fell on the military medals on the man's chest. He hesitated and did not say anything. He could see that the man was a real fierce general. Those military medals were enough to represent a lot of things. The military medals of the team might be exaggerated, but several of the military medals of the individual were real contributions. What did the man want to express by wearing them on his chest? Li Baitian glanced at Li Tianlan and did not speak. "They are all soldiers of Zhongzhou State, you." The lieutenant general's voice was loud and angry. But Li Tianlan did not bother to listen at all. He directly interrupted the man's roar. "Say it." The lieutenant general's momentum slightly stagnated. "I am the deputy of the Beijiang military region." "Say it." Li Tianlan looked into his eyes. "Or don't say it." The lieutenant general's eyes flickered, and then he sneered. "Well, your highness is really domineering, but don't forget your own position." He stared at Li Tianlan, and all his strength seemed to be on his face. The Beijiang military region held a large-scale confrontation maneuver in the desert. The nightmare troop of Emperor Dong's palace inexplicably ran to the desert prison and launched a war against us. Tens of thousands of soldiers of Beijiang stained the desert with their blood. Emperor Dong's palace must give Beijiang and Zhongzhou State an explanation for this matter. As a prisoner of the desert prison, you actually left the range of the desert prison. Li Tianlan, you must also give Zhongzhou State an explanation for this matter. His Highness Gu Qianchuan was inspecting the scene of the maneuver, but he was directly killed by you. The invincible realm is the pillar of the country. Your behavior is equivalent to treason. He looked at Li Tianlan with no expression. Less than 200 kilometers away from you, the Beijiang Airbird missile base is monitoring everything here. Li Tianlan, tell me who ordered you to do all this, and then get back to the desert prison. This is your last chance. Li Tianlan did not speak. Li Baitian, who stood beside Li Tianlan, opened his eyes wide and was stunned for a moment. Confrontation maneuver? Did your family use live ammunition in the confrontation maneuver? When the Nightmare Corps arrived in the desert, it was the Huangsha Corps who took the initiative to open fire. Did you say that the Nightmare Corps initiated the war? Obviously, the other party came here at this time not only to test Li Tianlan's attitude after the blockade action. What else did they want to do? Li Baitian's heart was cold, but the anger deep in his heart suddenly rushed up. He couldn't help taking a step forward and directly cursed, "You mother-cur!" Li Tianlan reached out and stopped Li Baitian. He looked at the lieutenant general in front of him quietly and laughed softly. "I really don't know who gave you the courage to stand here," Li Tianlan said softly. His voice was as soft as the wind, with an extremely cold aura that seemed to blow into people's bones. "Is it Chen Fangqing? Is it Huang Tong? Or is it your so-called missile base?" The lieutenant general's face changed. He resisted the urge to take a step back and said in a deep voice, "You'd better know what you're talking about. Do you really want to commit treason?" Thousands of soldiers of Emperor Dong's palace are now lying in the desert. Who is responsible? The army of Beijiang killed them, and now you want me to bear the consequences? What are you going to do with all those military medals? Lieutenant General? Swagger? Or do you want to tell me that you're the hero of Zhongzhou State, and I dare not kill you? Li Tianlan's voice was cold without any warmth, and he said resolutely, "Treason. I'll say it here today. The lives of more than 1,000 soldiers must be paid with blood. No one can stop me. If I really leave Zhongzhou State because of this, it's not me who betrayed Zhongzhou State, but Zhongzhou State betrayed me." He looked at the lieutenant general in front of him, or to be exact, at the miniature camera on the lieutenant general's collar. "I won't stop until I die. Are you ready?" He grabbed a corner of his cloak with his hand and suddenly pulled it. In an instant, an unimaginably bright sword light appeared over the desert. With Li Tianlan as the center, the sword light quickly stretched out in the night sky. A rainbow appeared under the night sky of the desert. The colorful rainbow crossed the desert in an instant and appeared at the missile base 200 kilometers away. The sword light was like a rainbow. Fast. It was incredibly fast. The extremely bright light exploded in the center of the missile base almost as soon as Li Tianlan raised his palm. There was a loud bang. The earth shook and the mountains shook. It was deafening. The raging fire suddenly enveloped everything. The entire base exploded from the ground to the ground. The strong fire swept everything in the base, the buildings, the turf, the garden, the vehicles and the soldiers. Everything was completely shattered in the explosion. The mushroom cloud rose into the night sky. The violent explosion affected the nearby cities, and the whole city was shaking slightly. Li Tianlan put down his palm. The rainbow disappeared. A black windbreaker reappeared on Li Tianlan's body. "What did you do?" "You." The lieutenant general's face was pale. The almost earth-shattering explosion could be vaguely heard even here. He finally couldn't help but take a step back. Li Tianlan crooked his finger. A special encrypted mobile phone flew out of the lieutenant general's pocket. Li Tianlan picked up the phone, lowered his head, and dialed a number. The phone was quickly connected, and a cold voice sounded. "This is Dongqing Wudi." "Minister, it's me," Li Tianlan said. On the military plane, Dongqing Wudi froze for a moment and looked at the display. "Tianlan? Is Qian Guoqiang with you?" Li Tianlan didn't know who Qian Guoqiang was, but it must be the name of the lieutenant general in front of him. He said slowly, "I have a request for the aftermath of the war in the desert." "Go ahead," Dongqing Wudi said calmly. "Every soldier who died in the battle in Emperor Dong's palace should become a martyr recognized by Zhongzhou State." Li Tianlan said calmly. "No problem." Dongqing Wudi answered without hesitation. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and said again, "You didn't understand what I meant." Dongqing Wudi hummed and seemed to be confused. Then he fell silent. He might not understand at first, but after Li Tianlan emphasized it again, he naturally understood. The victims of Emperor Dong's palace should become martyrs of Zhongzhou State. The tens of thousands of Beijiang soldiers who died in the desert could not be regarded as martyrs. If this matter was determined in this way, it was self-evident what it meant. "They deserve it," Li Tianlan said lightly. This was what he said from the bottom of his heart. Maybe those people were right. But Li Tianlan couldn't stand in the shoes of others to consider the problem. He had his own standpoint, and from his standpoint, those people deserved it. "I see." Dongqing Wudi was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, "Wait for me in the desert. I'm already on my way." Li Tianlan said no more and silently hung up the phone. The mobile phone in his hand silently turned into extremely tiny pieces. Li Tianlan looked up at the lieutenant general who had just swaggered in front of him, narrowed his eyes and whispered, "Do you have any last words?" Chapter 878. "You." The lieutenant general couldn't help but take another step back. He stared at Li Tianlan in front of him and observed his expression. Li Tianlan's expression was calm and casual, but the faint killing intent in his eyes seemed to be real. He was serious. The lieutenant general finally confirmed this. "You must be responsible for your actions." The Lieutenant General forced himself to calm down. He looked at Li Tianlan and said in a suppressed voice, 200 kilometers away, the Skybird missile. Gone. Li Tianlan said lightly, the so-called missile base you mentioned is gone. The Lieutenant General thought of the voice he had vaguely heard before, and his face became more and more gloomy. He shook his head fiercely. It's impossible. Li Tianlan looked at him and nodded after a moment of silence. It's a little boring. He looked at the miniature camera on the Lieutenant General's collar. I don't know what you want to do by filming this idiot, but I appreciate your approach. I hope you send more people to die. One Lieutenant General is not enough. The subtle light on the desert floated slowly and fell on the Lieutenant General. In an instant, a large amount of blood sprayed out of the Lieutenant General's body, as if there were countless tiny but extremely sharp long swords piercing his body. His body became a fountain, from head to toe, spraying blood all over his body. The extremely distorted and miserable wails suddenly rang out. The voice was desperate and frightened to the extreme. Scarlet blood splashed into the air, reflecting an extremely strange color under the reflection of the sword light. It was a beautiful scene. Li Baitian, who was standing beside Li Tianlan, looked at the scene and listened to the Lieutenant General scream. His body trembled subconsciously. The Lieutenant General's body fell to the ground, screaming at the top of his lungs. Countless tiny light spots covered his whole body, and a large amount of blood dyed the desert under him red at a speed visible to the naked eye. The light surged on him at a steady pace, and his body seemed to be getting smaller and smaller. Li Tianlan didn't move and looked at him coldly. The Lieutenant General's screams grew weaker and weaker. Every speck of light on his body was a sharp sword. Tens of thousands of swords shuttled through his body, grinding against each other and melting his flesh, bringing him the greatest pain in the tiniest of places. His body gradually disappeared. More than 10 minutes later, the Lieutenant General had completely lost all traces of its existence. His military uniform, medals, and body had all disappeared, leaving only a pool of blood on the ground. Li Tianlan turned back to sort out the corpses and muttered to himself, a Beijiang military region is not enough. One Lieutenant General was not enough. An invincible realm expert was not enough. The Beijiang military region was not enough. Li Tianlan said he wanted revenge. All of his hatred, all of his cruel methods, seemed to point towards a single target. Li Baitian took a deep breath and lifted a corpse with Li Tianlan. He suddenly said, Chen Fengqing? One Chen Fengqing is not enough. Li Tianlan lowered his head. His life can't compare to more than 1,000 elites of Emperor Dong's palace. So, Li Baitian's scalp went numb. One prince group is enough. Li Tianlan smiled. His tone was still calm, but the content of his words could be said to be earth-shattering. Li Baitian took a deep breath and finally understood what Li Tianlan wanted to do. The blockade of Beijiang military region was a war initiated by Chen Fengqing against Emperor Dong's palace. And now Li Tianlan wanted more than just revenge. What he returned to Chen Fengqing was also a war. A war that was crazy enough to involve the entire Zhongzhou state. But now, Li Baitian hesitated for a moment. Isn't it too early? It's not early. Li Tianlan said, the opportunity is here. I have enough strength. His strength was enough. Now the opportunity was also here. Li Tianlan was sure that he was invincible now. He might not be able to fight against the whole world alone as Wang Tianzong did in Eastern Europe. But now if he wanted to kill someone, he didn't think anyone in the dark world could escape. He already had the strength to stand at the peak of an individual. Shenyuan City was developing rapidly and thriving. All kinds of resources were gradually perfected. The huge capital flow was endless, and all aspects of the system were constantly being optimized. When he officially set foot in Shenyuan City, that was the time when Emperor Dong's palace started to integrate Tiannan. Simply put, he also had the foundation of a superpower. The giant group had been reshuffling in the past 2 years. The total scale of the group had shrunk a lot, but it was more cohesive. At critical moments, it could make the same voice. Li Tianlan was sure that this voice would support him, so he also had the absolutely reliable strong support. It didn't matter whether the identity of military counselor was exposed or not. The key was the saber in his hand. That saber belonged to Samsara Palace. Now Li Tianlan had the strength to hold that saber. He also had some surviving elders of the Li family. The strength he had now was enough to support a new group. The differences among the upper echelons of Zhongzhou state became more and more intense. Li Huaqing gradually became conservative, Chen Fengqing was stubborn, Gu Xingyun was seriously injured, and with the death of Gu Qianchuan, the special warfare group was in a panic. Under such circumstances, the Southeast group could not let go of the Prince group, and the giant group fully supported Li Tianlan. With such a good opportunity, Li Tianlan thought that he could try to shake and even destroy the foundation of the entire Prince group. He was sure. In the next few decades, he might not have such a good opportunity again. Time passed slowly. All the corpses of the dead in Emperor Dong's palace were gradually sorted out. When Bai Yuming, who was in charge of the middle part of the battlefield, came to Li Tianlan's side, the roar of the helicopter rotors sounded at the same time. In the distant night, a dense group of helicopters gradually approached and began to gradually descend from a very far place. 10, 20, 30. 2 squadrons of helicopters slowly landed in the desert. The door of the leading helicopter was pulled open. Dongqing Wudi, the minister of the army headquarters, took the lead to come out. Bai Qingzhao followed him. Beside Bai Qingzhao, there was a serious general in a military uniform next to him. Li Tianlan walked over, thought about it, and still did not salute. He was no longer the marshal of Zhongzhou state and had nothing to do with the military on the surface. Minister. He took the initiative to reach out and hold Dongqing Wudi's palm. It's good that you're okay. It's good that you're okay. Dongqing Wudi held Li Tianlan's palm tightly and said, "Come on, let me introduce you. This is Commander He Donglai of the Air Force, my old friend." Li Tianlan looked at the helicopter with the Suzhou logo on the desert and reached out to shake He Donglai's hand. "Thank you, Commander He." He Donglai, who was silent and looked a little serious, suddenly smiled and said in a low voice, "It seems that I don't have to go to the desert prison." Li Tianlan was a little stunned. Dongqing Wudi smiled, but his eyes were a little cold. Beijiang blocked the way of contact with the Air Force. When they sent out the ambition team, Donglai was ready to transfer people from Suzhou to snipe the Air Force of the Beijiang military region. If it weren't for you, the scene in the desert would be much more lively now. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, held He Donglai's broad palm, and said seriously, "Commander He, I will remember this favor." He Donglai shook his head and did not speak. Behind him, the surviving members of Emperor Dong's palace were gradually gathering. Li Tianlan said hello to Bai Qingzhao, turned around and waved to the people of Emperor Dong's palace. The survivors carried the bodies of the victims to the helicopters. Except for the leading helicopter, all the other helicopters only had pilots and co-pilots, and the cabins were all empty. The corpses were carried up one by one. When all the helicopters were full, there were still half of the corpses left. 2 squadrons of helicopters slowly took off and returned to Suzhou. As soon as the first batch of helicopters rose, the second batch of helicopters landed again. Li Tianlan watched this scene quietly. He watched the corpses being carried to the helicopters without saying a word. No one knew what he was thinking. "Come back to Yuzhou with me." Dongqing Wudi stood beside Li Tianlan and suddenly said. His voice was steady. It was not an order. It was not a discussion. It was an attitude. It came from the attitude of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou state. From the second he said this, Li Tianlan was no longer a prisoner of the desert prison. Dongqing Wudi showed up here as soon as possible to express this attitude. At least from this point of view, he could stop others from talking. Li Tianlan nodded and watched the second batch of helicopters slowly disappear into the night. The distant night sky lit up again. When all the corpses were transported to Suzhou, the third batch of helicopters landed in the desert again. All the survivors of Emperor Dong's palace gathered silently in front of the helicopters. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and walked over. Everyone was looking at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at them. The faces in his line of sight were filled with exhaustion, weakness, anger, and sorrow. But they were not confused, nor did they flinch. It was not until this moment that Li Tianlan was finally sure that this war that caused heavy losses to Emperor Dong's palace also made the most direct transformation of the Nightmare Army. There were only 300 elites who fought their way out of the army of 100,000. And these 300 people in front of him were destined to become the strongest cornerstone of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. "Thank you." Li Tianlan looked at every face in front of him and said softly, "Thank you for everything you have done in this war." There was a slight commotion in the crowd, but no one spoke. Li Tianlan smiled and continued, "This war is not meaningless. We have suffered heavy losses, but we have not failed." The Nightmare Army with less than 2,000 people passed through the defense line of nearly 100,000 troops. Maybe we don't have to wait until tomorrow. Maybe now, the whole dark world knows the name of the Nightmare Army and the dignity and bottom line of Emperor Dong's palace. All of this is protected by your lives. You should be remembered by this era. This is our era. Everyone who died in the war or lived, everyone is a hero of this era. No matter how glorious Emperor Dong's palace will be in the future, everyone in this era will remember that when we were weak at the beginning, it was you who forged the pride and dignity of Emperor Dong's palace with your blood and life. Li Tianlan looked deeply at the crowd in front of him and said, "I will give you an explanation. Wait for me in Tiannan." He nodded to Li Beitian and said calmly, "Now get on the plane and go back." Everyone turned around at the same time and silently walked into the helicopters one after another. Lin Fengting walked to Li Tianlan and said with a smile, "I'll go to Tiannan too." Li Tianlan glanced at him and nodded. "Okay." Lin Fengting nodded with a smile and followed the elites of Emperor Dong's palace without saying goodbye to Dongqing Wudi. The helicopters slowly took off. The faint light illuminated the desert. Li Tianlan stood in the light and watched the helicopters get higher and farther away. He was silent for a long time. Dongqing Wudi looked at the scene quietly, with a complicated look in his eyes. He thought of the sword light that tore the sky and the earth, the silent but firm eyes of the Nightmare Army before they left, and the messy battlefield the helicopters flew all the way. He finally realized something. In this magnificent era, tonight, Emperor Dong's palace officially took its first step. Countless glory and splendor were ahead. They were all on the way to Emperor Dong's palace. Just as Li Tianlan had said. This was their era. Chapter 879. When Chen Fengqing walked into Li Huaqing's office, Li Huaqing had just turned off the video in the office, cut off the satellite signal, and was going to rest. Recently, Zhongzhou State had been troubled. The exposure of the termination plan had caused too many chain reactions, and the action of blocking the desert had pushed everything to the point of no return. Li Huaqing's heart was always tense, waiting for a result. As a result, the Nightmare Legion suffered heavy losses. Tens of thousands of troops in Beijiang were buried with the result of almost being wiped out. At the same time, Li Tianlan's earth-shattering sword came. It was hard to say whether this result was what Li Huaqing wanted. But whether he wanted it or not, at least it was a result. A result that could not be changed. Li Huaqing's heart relaxed. The exhaustion all over his body made him appear muddle-headed. He drank the tasteless strong tea in front of him, stood up, and reached out to turn off the desk lamp in front of the desk. "President." A middle-aged secretary walked over with a respectful expression. Li Huaqing glanced at him. The secretary looked at the tired Li Huaqing, hesitated, and told the truth. "The Prime Minister is outside." Li Huaqing was silent for a while, took out a cigarette, lit it, took a deep breath and said, "Invite him in." The desk lamp was turned off. He turned on the light in the office, poured himself a glass of water, and sat on the sofa in silence. In the sound of heavy footsteps, Chen Fengqing walked in slowly. He seemed to feel that there was no need to hide anything. His calm face looked a little gloomy. Li Huaqing held the cigarette and said nothing. Chen Fengqing sat opposite Li Huaqing and also said nothing. A cigarette slowly burned out. Li Huaqing picked up the teacup and drank some water. He looked at Chen Fengqing, who still had no intention of speaking, and said flatly, "Obviously your plan failed." Chen Fengqing suddenly clenched his fists. The news just came that the airborne bird missile base in Beijiang was destroyed. All the weapons, equipment, base construction, and more than 300 soldiers and some researchers in the base all died. Chen Fengqing said each word, gritting his teeth. "So." Li Huaqing was calm. Chen Fengqing suddenly broke out. He jumped up and roared, "He's committing treason. He is the enemy of Zhongzhou State, and he is provoking its dignity. Ambition Team, Fierce Tiger Armored Corps, Airborne Bird Missile Base, the 43rd Army, Gu Qianchuan. These are all Li Tianlan's responsibility. He didn't care about Zhongzhou State at all. He only cared about himself and Emperor Dong's palace. He dares to do this now, What about 10 years later? If he dares to do this now, will he? If he really became the so-called heavenly son, would Zhongzhou State become his slaughterhouse? If he really becomes the so-called son of Li, he, Li Huaqing, will said. Li Huaqing rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache coming on. What do you mean by that? I Tianlan, Li Fan, Li Tianlan, I said. Back. Chen Fengqing said seriously, he has almost no scruples in doing things. If he continues to grow, he will be even more dangerous than the Wang family of Beihai. Such a person must not be left alive. I suggest that we immediately recall Minister Dongqing Wudi and kill him in the desert at all costs. You can do that. Li Huaqing quietly looked at Chen Fengqing. After a long time he nodded. You can do it now. In fact, you've already done it, but you didn't succeed. I don't deny my failure. Chen Fengqing also lit a cigarette and took a big drag. But it is because of this failure that we can see Li Tianlan's true colors. I need your support. Impossible. Without any hesitation, Li Huaqing said decisively. Looking at Chen Fengqing's ugly expression, he took a deep breath and said in a low voice, I support you? If I support you now, I will start a civil war. Prime Minister, you should calm down. Don't you think it's messy enough? Chen Fengqing was silent for a while and seemed to be thinking about the wording. When he was about to speak, Li Huaqing continued, You can't convince me. No matter what the reason is, Prime Minister, our cooperation is not like this. I still say that I can understand your behavior, but I don't agree with your approach. There are many possibilities for Zhongzhou State in the future, but if I agree to support you now, it will be a disaster for Zhongzhou State now. I personally think that you should stop this series of actions. How to deal with the aftermath is the most important thing you should consider. Chen Fengqing suddenly stood up with a livid face. Li Huaqing lowered his head quietly and drank some water. Chen Fengqing said no more and left the president's office without saying a word. The secretary, who was already past work time, respectfully sent Chen Fengqing out. Looking at the direction he left, the secretary frowned slightly and returned to the president's office. President. The secretary glanced at Li Huaqing and stopped talking. Say it. Li Huaqing smiled. The prime minister seems to have gone to Tianan Pavilion. The secretary said softly. The location of Tianan Pavilion in the Hidden Dragon Sea and Chen Fengqing's residence was the opposite. There was also a director of Zhongzhou State, Zhou Yunhai, the leader of the North Group, living there. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and shook his head. It doesn't make sense. He stood up and looked at the secretary with a smile. Let's go. Work is over. Let's go eat something together. Oh, by the way, inform Minister Dongqing. Li Huaqing stopped and said, when they return to Yuzhou, ask them to come over. The last batch of helicopters completely disappeared into the night sky. In the desert, Dongqing Wudi hung up the phone with a calm expression and let out a long breath. Li Tianlan still stood there, looking at the direction where the helicopters left. Let's go. Dongqing Wudi took 2 steps forward and reached out to pat Li Tianlan on the shoulder. I just received a call from the president's office. The president wants to see you. There should be a conclusion to this matter. Li Tianlan knew what the so-called conclusion was without thinking. He nodded and said thoughtfully, he is smarter than Chen Fengqing. That's a good thing. Dongqing Wudi said seriously. Indeed. Li Tianlan nodded. Let's go. Dongqing Wudi waved his hand, and the rotors of the helicopter beside him began to turn slowly. Li Tianlan looked back in the direction of the prison and gently raised his hand. A stream of sword energy spread from his hand, and his figure disappeared in an instant. At the same time, in the desert prison, the flower of sword energy inserted in Qin Weibai's hair suddenly trembled. The flower, which looked lifeless, was almost full of vitality and color in an instant. Qin Weibai thoughtfully took off the flower on her head. The crystal-clear flower was trembling gently, and the flower branches and petals seemed to be in full bloom at this moment. The lifelike petals bloomed to the limit in the blink of an eye. The flower condensed by sword energy was broken in Qin Weibai's white and tender palm. Li Tianlan appeared beside Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai blinked. Before she could react, she was directly carried by Li Tianlan. Let's go. He lowered his head and sniffed the delicate fragrance close at hand, and his whole body relaxed slightly. "Where to?" Qin Weibai reached out and obediently put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck and asked softly. "Get out of here." Li Tianlan's voice was firm. "To see our country." Chapter 880. The living room of the warmly and luxuriously decorated villa shone with all kinds of lights and shadows. The lights in the living room were dimmed. On the huge projection screen that almost occupied the entire wall, all kinds of pictures kept flickering. Yellow sand fluttered in the air. An explosion of raging flames. Domineering sword light. His Majesty sat on the sofa and watched these pictures. He had been silent for a long time. Jiang Guachu sat on the sofa on the other side with a solemn face. From time to time, he glanced in the direction of His Majesty with undisguised curiosity. On the screen was the picture of the Desert War. From beginning to end. It sounded like nothing, but in fact, it was shocking enough. The Zhang family of South America naturally had its own information channels in Zhongzhou State. Not only the Zhang family of South America, but also Jifeng Sword Training School in East Island had its own pawns that had been operating for many years. But unsurprisingly, they couldn't get any video images about the Desert War at all. It was said that those who were qualified to pay attention to the Desert War could be regarded as leaders of Zhongzhou State. In terms of authority, they had reached the level of Zhongzhou State councillors. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible for countries and forces in the world to cultivate their pawns to such a level. But His Majesty could directly watch everything about the Desert War, including all the details. What did this mean? And this kind of watching was not the video that was obtained afterward. The picture on the screen was a little delayed, but there was no doubt that it was a real live broadcast. This also meant that His Majesty had at least one councillor's connections in Zhongzhou State, and he had enough influence to let this councillor bear all the risks for him. For the Zhang family of South America, this news was even more important than the shocking sword stroke in the video. "Your Majesty," Moraid suddenly called out. In the middle of the sofa, His Majesty gave a faint and watched the sword stroke in the video over and over again. The Desert War was over. But he kept playing the picture of that moment, over and over again. "What should we do now?" Moraid's tone was a little hesitant. The operation of the alliance of several forces to infiltrate Beihai had reached the final stage. The final battle was imminent, and the whole dark world was waiting for the result. But now Li Tianlan left the desert directly. The minister of the army headquarters personally took him back to Yuzhou. This attitude could not be more obvious. What was worse was that Li Tianlan might have stood by and watched the game between Zhongzhou State and Beihai. But after the blockade, Li Tianlan and Beihai would definitely join hands. Whether it was the termination plan, the blockade action, or the large number of elites of the Nightmare Troop who died in the desert, Li Tianlan and Chen Fengqing were destined to be irreconcilable enemies. This kind of personal grudge was magnified countless times at the most critical moment. Not to mention how Li Tianlan would retaliate against Chen Fengqing. At least now the more Chen Fengqing wanted to do something, the less likely Li Tianlan would let him do it. The 100,000-strong army moved majestically, but the blockade did not last more than 2 days. They expected the blockade to last at least half a month. The time difference meant too many things. Moray didn't know whether to say that the Beijiang military region was incompetent or that Emperor Dong's palace was too strong. In short, the result was there. Emperor Dong's palace, which had suffered heavy losses, had found its real core. In the next decisive battle in North Sea, they would also face Li Tianlan, and even face that sword. Moraid couldn't block that sword. He didn't want to find any reason or excuse, and there was no need. He really couldn't block it. He was now only half a step away from the peak of the invincible realm. Even if he could take this half a step in this period of time and become a real expert at the peak of the invincible realm, he still couldn't block that sword. Even if he had the Pope's coronation, even if he was really at the peak of the invincible realm, Gu Chenchuan's death was still vivid in his mind. Moraid could be sure that at that moment, no matter if it was Gu Chenchuan or other experts at the peak of the invincible realm, as long as they stood in that position and faced that sword light, there would be no possibility of survival. "Are you afraid?" His Majesty lowered his head, looked at the sword light shuttling in the screen, and chuckled. The video had been played in slow motion. But the sword light on the screen was still like wind and lightning, insufferably arrogant. "I can't block this sword strike," Moraid said seriously. He was talking about the sword strike on the screen. The power of this sword strike was not as good as the eternal sword strike that injured the Chosen One in Eastern Europe. It was also not as good as the sword strike that the unidentified Chosen One made against Mount Dibbing about a year ago. But in terms of scene, this sword strike could be said to be the most gorgeous. This sword flew thousands of miles, rushed through mountains, rivers, and seas, tore up the ambitious team, the steel torrent, and tens of thousands of troops. After its power continued to weaken, it still killed Gu Qianchuan, who was holding a murderous weapon, in a flash. It could still kill someone at the peak of the invincible realm. Moraid couldn't block this sword strike from a distance. If it was a sword strike at a close distance, he couldn't block it. If you can't block it, then you can't block it. You don't need to block it. His Majesty's voice was gentle. And the state of this sword is a bit special. It can be regarded as a murderous weapon. Its power will only get weaker and weaker. It is not as terrible as you think. At this stage, in my opinion, Li Tianlan is the most terrible. Moraid wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. His Majesty seemed to know what he wanted to ask. He glanced at him and said quietly, "The final battle will continue. If this sword strike really appears on the battlefield, I will deal with it." His tone was flat and casual. Thinking of His Majesty's strange domain, Moraid calmed down slightly. His Majesty's finger gently slid across the screen, and the sword strike was played back again, tearing apart heaven and earth, moving forward with indomitable will. His Majesty's eyes were fixed on the sword light. The curve of his mouth was still there, but his eyes were full of disgust. Little by little, the pain that seemed to come from the depths of his memory gradually spread all over his body. His body trembled subconsciously, as if there were countless sword energy penetrating his body. The vague clouds and starlight shrouded him. He closed his eyes, smiled a little ferociously, and murmured, "Wuqing, it's been a long time." The sword light was reflected in the eyes of many people. His Majesty watched it again. Wang Shangxiao was also watching it. For anyone who aspired to the end of martial arts, that sword light could be regarded as the most beautiful scenery in the world. His Majesty's eyes were full of disgust. But Wang Shengxiao's eyes were full of appreciation. That kind of look was not surprise or shock, but pure appreciation. It was undisguised, unreserved, and with a little excitement. Phoenix sat next to him and could clearly see the emotions in her nephew's eyes. To be exact, it was as if he was looking at something that belonged to him and expressing his joy. "You want that sword?" Phoenix said slowly. It was not a question. It was a statement without any emotional ups and downs. "That was my sword in the first place." Wang Shangxiao turned to look at her and said with a soft smile, "Or it is the sword of the Wang family of Beihai, the invincible sword in the world, strong beyond imagination." When did the sword of the Wang family of Beihai recognize an outsider as its master? Phoenix's voice was a little sarcastic. Wang Shengxiao didn't care. He seemed to have adapted to this aunt's cynicism toward the Wang family of Beihai. He looked at the screen quietly and said calmly, "It doesn't matter. What matters is that it will return to the Wang family of Beihai and become the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai's continued glory." "You are no match for Li Tianlan," Phoenix said calmly. "Far from it. You should know this yourself, so you want to take the sword. Where does your confidence come from?" "I'm not taking the sword." Wang Shangxiao shook his head, and his voice was a little stubborn. "That is the sword of the Wang family of Beihai. Now it should just go home." "Li Tianlan won't think so. If the invincible sword really goes to Beihai, do you think Li Tianlan will let you go?" Phoenix sneered. "Does Li Tianlan's attitude matter? What matters is that I have the right to take back what belongs to the Wang family of Beihai." Wang Shengxiao's voice was a little cold. He looked at the sword light on the screen and narrowed his eyes tightly. "With this sword, I can sweep the world. What can Li Tianlan do if he is not satisfied?" "You are courting death." Phoenix sat up straight and said seriously. "Don't worry." Wang Shengxiao laughed. "Aunt, Li Tianlan is not an enemy. The ownership of Shenyuan Feng is not decided by Li Tianlan, nor by me. Its only result is to become a divine weapon of the Wang family of Beihai. As for Emperor Dong's palace, we will give enough compensation." "What kind of compensation do you think can satisfy Li Tianlan's appetite?" Phoenix shook her head. Wang Shangxiao was silent for a while, and then said quietly, "A group." He paused and continued, "A supergroup that can compete with the Southeast group." Chapter 881. It was snowing all over Yuzhou. The heavy snow had been falling from last night to nearly noon, and it had become an extremely rare snowstorm in Yuzhou in recent years. Li Tianlan stood in front of the French window in his bedroom, looking down at the large urban area. He looked casual and comfortable. The room was as warm as spring. Outside the window, it was snowing heavily. The wild snowstorm covered every street and every building in sight. The whole world was pale and quiet. The scene was extremely quiet, but also extremely vivid. Li Tianlan closed his eyes subconsciously. He had returned to Yuzhou last night, but he did not go to Prince Yong's mansion or the Bai family's manor. Instead, he chose a hotel on Chang'an Street. It was not that he treated Dongqing Wudi as an outsider. Prince Yong's mansion was originally his and Dongqing Rushi's wedding house. The Bai family chose the site and the Dongqing family paid for it. But now Dongqing Rushi was unconscious in Tiannan. If he lived there with Qin Wei Bai, he always felt that it was a little inappropriate. It was even more inappropriate to live in the Bai family. Qin Wei Bai also had a property in Yuzhou, but no one had cleaned it for a long time. In addition, Li Tianlan was going to the Hidden Dragon Sea today, so he simply found a hotel nearby to stay. From Beijiang to Yuzhou, it was thousands of miles away in one night. It seemed very unusual. But for Li Tianlan, it was a completely different world. In the desert, he was pure and quiet. He didn't need to think too much about anything. The only thing he needed to pursue was his own swordsmanship. And in Yuzhou, he was the palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, the Emperor Dong of the Dark World. The Desert War had ended. The Beijiang military region and Emperor Dong's palace had tasted the bitter fruit that they didn't want to taste at all. The cruel reality was in front of him. Li Tianlan could already control his emotions. But he seemed to be still immersed in the state of raising swords in the desert. So that he still felt a little uncomfortable when he came to Yuzhou from the desert. He found it difficult to adapt to his current perspective of the world. It was an indescribable feeling. During Li Tianlan's 2 years in the desert, there had always been rumors in the Dark World that he was the #1 expert in the Dark World after Lin Fengting. Li Tianlan knew this. He wasn't sure if he felt pressure or how much pressure he felt. But it was undeniable that he had been making progress in the past 2 years. When he was about to break through the invincible realm, his progress in all aspects was limited to a certain height because of his body. Moreover, because he hadn't fought with anyone, he couldn't even tell how much he had improved. That year, Li Tianlan was less than 25 years old. It was really difficult for his body to support him officially entering the domain of the invincible realm. Therefore, in the process of nurturing the sword, he chose another direction of martial arts. Therefore, all the progress of the last 2 years has been completely and utterly unrestrained, in a most perfect way. Show it. The muddle-headed Li Tianlan didn't feel anything. However, when Xian Yuanfeng entered the desert, when he became completely clear-minded and restrained his killing intent for the time being, when he returned to Yuzhou province and completely recovered his composure, he finally realized that something was different. The world might not have changed, but his perspective had changed. It was a kind of change that he had never thought of before. To be exact, it was a perspective of truly standing at the peak of personal strength in the Dark World. Everything in sight. Snow filled the sky, skyscrapers, dense streets, surging traffic, and a boundless world. All of this became extremely fragile in his eyes. It was so fragile that he could easily destroy everything with a flick of his finger. This feeling made Li Tianlan feel novel and scared. He had almost been suppressing his desire to destroy and fight, so that he could control himself to stand here quietly. The flying snowflakes hit the French windows, making a soft sound. The breeze blew through the falling snow, and all the sounds seemed to be infinitely magnified. His perception was almost extremely sharp. Li Tianlan shook his head hard, turned around, and quietly closed the curtains. On the bed, Qin Weibai gently turned over, made a lazy sound, and opened her eyes. "Why are you awake?" Li Tianlan sat on the edge of the bed and touched her hair. Qin Weibai shook her head and rolled her eyes at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were a little hazy and blurred. The pair of eyes that seemed to be always cold and indifferent were soft, enchanting, and captivating. She wrapped herself in a snow-white velvet quilt, put her white and tender arms on Li Tianlan's palm, and whispered, "Hug me." Li Tianlan took off his pajamas, got back into the quilt, and hugged the soft and light body beside him. Qin Weibai rubbed her face against Li Tianlan's chest and murmured, "I dreamed." "What dream?" Li Tianlan reached out and gently pinched Qin Weibai's ear, and asked casually. A natural and rich fragrance filled the room. His body was so relaxed that he didn't even bother to move for a while. "I dreamed that you dumped me and told me to get out. You said you never wanted to see me again." Qin Weibai subconsciously hugged Li Tianlan, as if still immersed in the dream. Her voice was a little aggrieved and pitiful. "Ridiculous." Li Tianlan's palm made a crisp sound in the white velvet quilt. He didn't promise anything but just laughed and scolded, "Am I a fool in your dream?" "Who knows?" Qin Weibai gently bit Li Tianlan. "Maybe I'm tired of playing." Li Tianlan sneered and looked down at Qin Weibai's cold and resentful face with a special blush. "I think you don't want to get out of bed today." "Don't." Qin Weibai screamed and seemed to wake up completely. She put one hand against Li Tianlan's chest and grabbed her clothes in a panic with the other hand. "I want to take a shower. I have an appointment today." "I can't." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and was about to say something when his phone suddenly rang. "The phone. The phone is ringing. Answer the phone, be good." Qin Weibai pushed Li Tianlan and said in a soft voice. Li Tianlan shook his head and took the phone. For a moment, the soft peaks and the warm valley were far away from him. Qin Weibai put on her bathrobe, glared at Li Tianlan, and walked into the bathroom. Li Tianlan was a little annoyed. When he picked up the phone and heard the voice, his eyes became even colder. The voice on the other side of the phone was respectful, and it could even be said to be in fear and trepidation. "Hello, Your Highness Li Tianlan. I'm Little Yuan from the Cabinet Office." Just by listening to the voice, Li Tianlan could imagine the cautious picture on the other end of the phone. Li Tianlan smiled and said lightly, "Do I know you?" This sentence was direct and domineering, leaving no face for the other party. The Cabinet Office of Zhongzhou State. In terms of rank, this was a real governor-level agency. The so-called Little Yuan was not young at all, whether in age or rank. Although he was not the chief of the general office, he was the first deputy. His real job was the chief secretary of Chen Fengqing. In Zhongzhou State, he was definitely a sensitive and powerful figure. The other end of the phone did not speak for a long time, not knowing whether it was because of anger or fear. Li Tianlan did not bother to pay attention to it and hung up the phone. He looked at his watch, listened to the sound of running water in the bathroom, and slowly put on his clothes. The door of the bathroom was locked. Li Tianlan pushed it, but it did not open. "What?" Qin Weibai's fierce voice sounded, but it sounded without confidence. "I'm going to Hidden Dragon Sea," Li Tianlan said. The sound of running water in the bathroom was a little lower. Qin Weibai said, "I won't check out the room. I'll live here for the time being. What do you want to eat at noon?" "Whatever," Li Tianlan said indifferently. "I may not come back at noon, or I'll have lunch with the minister." "I'll come back to pick you up then," Qin Weibai said. The door of the bathroom was gently pulled open. Qin Weibai's dreamy face was exposed because of the water vapor. She looked at Li Tianlan and said seriously, "Li Huaqing's conditions won't be low, but his bottom line won't be too high either. Stick to what you should." "I know." Li Tianlan pinched her little nose and turned to go out. The phone rang again when he closed the door. It was still the same number. Li Tianlan thought about it and pressed the answer button. "Your Highness Li Tianlan, I'm Yuan Shi from the Cabinet Office of Zhongzhou State. Here's the thing. The Prime Minister has something to talk to you alone. It's 10:20 in the morning. The Prime Minister has half an hour. Please don't be late." The voice on the phone, which had been cautious not long ago, became righteous, but it was a little trembling. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said coldly, "I don't have time. Let him wait." Chapter 882. Ma Si sat quietly in the lobby of the hotel and looked down at his watch from time to time. He casually responded to the flattery of the hotel general manager with a nervous expression. The hotel had been cordoned off an hour ago. The lobby was quiet and seemed a little cold. A few essential staff members stood carefully at their posts, occasionally sneaking glances at their boss. They didn't know Ma Si, but looking at the cautious attitude of their boss, even a fool knew that this seemingly strange middle-aged man was absolutely a big shot. However, such a big shot would also wait for someone, and he had been waiting for nearly half an hour, which made everyone curious. The hotel general manager, who had been carefully accompanying Ma Si, was even more curious. He was curious and a little afraid. Yuzhou was full of high-ranking officials and people with great power. Ma Si's rank was far from the highest in Yuzhou, but looking at the whole Zhongzhou state, there were few people who were qualified to make Ma Si wait here without any temper. The first deputy director of the Zhongzhou State Office of Public Affairs. With this identity, there was no need to say anything at all. It was not the Zhongzhou State Cabinet Office of Public Affairs, nor the Zhongzhou State Army Headquarters Office. It was simply the Zhongzhou State Office of Public Affairs, an institution at the level of a counselor. The so-called first deputy director could be said to be the first secretary of Zhongzhou State. How many people in the whole Zhongzhou State were qualified to make him wait here? The first secretary of the president. The hotel general manager had carefully recalled many times, but he couldn't remember which immortal came to his hotel. Director Ma, do you need to rush him? You are so busy every day, so... The boss smiled and was careful. He naturally knew that the person who could make Ma Si wait here must have a powerful background, but at least he should express his attitude. Ma Si's nervous face eased a little, and he shook his head with a smile. No, I'll be here soon. He looked down at his watch again. It was 9:40. He shook his head and gave a wry smile. It had been more than 40 minutes since the meeting time, and he hadn't even received the person. The president was also self-restrained, and he hadn't rushed him until now. The boss nodded and said with a smile, "Recently, the shop has launched a new type of black tea, which tastes good. I'll ask someone to send it over, and you can have a taste." Ma Si nodded indifferently. Just as she was about to say something, the elevator door not far away slowly opened, and a young man who looked no more than 24-25 walked out unhurriedly. Ma Si bounced up like a spring, and a warm and respectful smile appeared on her face. He jogged away from his seat and stretched out his hands from afar. His feet moved like the wind, and his smile became more and more enthusiastic. The CEO stared at this scene with his mouth agape. He subconsciously stood up and didn't know whether he should step forward or not. Ma Si's face was already smiling like a flower. His attitude was even more exaggerated than when he was with the president. "Your Highness, hello, I am Ma Si." Ma Si walked quickly to Li Tianlan and stretched out her hands. Li Tianlan shook hands with him casually and said, "Hello, Ma Ting. Sorry to keep you waiting." Not long at all. I just arrived too. It's snowing heavily today, so the road conditions are quite average. Ma Si said insincerely and held Li Tianlan's palm with both hands. Feeling his enthusiasm, Li Tianlan gave him a playful look. Ma Si's smile became more and more respectful, and he even bowed slightly subconsciously. His position might not be at the core, but there was no doubt that he was the person who could see the core clearly. As Li Huaqing's secretary, he knew the cause of a series of things and the process of all things. As for the ending, because it didn't happen, he couldn't speculate, but he already knew his leader's choice. Li Huaqing refused to continue to cooperate with Chen Fengqing. At this point, Chen Fengqing might still want to continue to be crazy, but no one dared to continue to play with him. The situation was imminent. What Li Huaqing wanted to do most now was to stabilize the already precarious situation. Li Huaqing wanted to stabilize the already precarious situation. The suppression of Beihai should be stopped. At the same time, Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan should also make enough compensation to reach a new balance. Balance was compromise. Since there was compromise, there must be sacrifice. Chen Fengqing, who launched the termination plan, blocked the desert prison, and directly caused the death of tens of thousands of people, would naturally become a sacrifice. The whole prince group would even struggle because of this. Now there was less than a year before the election. At this critical point, the prince group would suffer unprecedented losses, even greater than the loss of Emperor Dong's palace in the desert. The Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group, who had been holding back their anger, were eyeing covetously. Since the academics compromised, they would not give up the benefits in their hands. As for Ma Si, he naturally hoped that he could get a piece of the cake. He was Li Huaqing's secretary, and his predecessor had been sent to a province in the northwest 2 years ago. It could be said that he was a real border commander. In this election, whether Li Huaqing was re-elected or not, he would generally be sent to a position with real power. Before this election, there would be a huge exchange of interests. His name would definitely appear on the list of the academics, and he would be familiar with Li Tianlan. At that time, whether Li Tianlan would support him or not, as long as Li Tianlan did not object, Ma Si's future would be bright. Ma Si was a little emotional. He looked at Li Tianlan with full awe in his eyes. Today this young man, who was less than 25 years old, was really important in Zhongzhou State. The Li family, the Tiannan Freedom Corps, Sai City, the Giant Group, the Wang family of Beihai, the Lin clan, and even a part of the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. All the winds and clouds gathered on Li Tianlan. Ma Si thought of the lieutenant general in the Beijiang military region, who died in the hands of Li Tianlan. He thought of what Li Tianlan said to the microcamera before the lieutenant general died. That was a sentence that everyone was destined to never forget. If I really leave Zhongzhou State because of this, it is not that I betrayed Zhongzhou State, but that Zhongzhou State betrayed me. If Zhongzhou State does not betray me, I will not betray Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan might have been reluctant to say this before, but now he had enough qualifications. The combat capability standing at the peak of individual force, the future that could almost unify the dark world in the future, the thriving Emperor Dong's palace, the dense network of relationships. Combining all these, Zhongzhou State had to consider the consequences of losing Li Tianlan. It was not a question of whether it could bear it. It was a question of whether it was willing to bear it. If Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan did not break through the blockade of the desert prison, it might be another story. But now Li Tianlan appeared in Yuzhou. In order to stabilize the new balance, Zhongzhou State must give Li Tianlan an explanation. Even the entire prince group had to give him an explanation. Ma Si's body trembled. Thinking of the coming wind and rain, his scalp was numb, and his whole body was trembling. Don't be nervous. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Let's go now. Don't let the president wait too long. Yes, your highness is right. Ma Si took a deep breath, bent down and said with a smile, Your highness, please. Li Tianlan nodded and walked in front of him as if it was a matter of course. The boss of the hotel stood there and wanted to go forward, but he did not dare. His body was stiff, and he bent down subconsciously, feeling a little embarrassed. Your highness, this is the general manager of the hotel. If you have any requirements, you can tell him. Ma Si introduced him with a smile in a low voice. Your highness? What kind of strange title is this? The boss was at a loss for a moment. Li Tianlan glanced at him and nodded. My wife likes the red bean cake here very much. Yes, your highness. I'll arrange for it to be delivered to madam immediately. The CEO nodded subconsciously. Li Tianlan nodded, turned around, and walked out of the hotel lobby. The CEO remained. He bent over until Li Tianlan and Ma Si walked out of the hotel. Then he straightened up a little and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He did not know who this highness was, but this person's aura was too sharp. He looked ordinary, but standing in front of him, he almost couldn't breathe. It was not until his figure completely disappeared that the CEO suddenly remembered that because he was too nervous, he did not even introduce himself. It was snowing outside the hotel. Ma Si walked down the stairs of the hotel, took a few quick steps, and personally opened the door of the car with a red flag with a special license plate. Li Tianlan sat inside and looked at the wind and snow outside the window in silence. The hotel was not far from the hidden Dragon Sea. Ma Si carefully chatted with Li Tianlan for a while and found that Li Tianlan was not in the mood to chat, so he turned on the stereo in the car. Before the music was finished, the car had slowly entered the hidden Dragon Sea. The hidden Dragon Sea was covered with silver, but the road had been cleared. The car stopped in front of Jinqiu Pavilion, and Li Tianlan's eyes were fixed on the front door of Jinqiu Pavilion. Li Huaqing was standing there with an easygoing smile and seemed to be enjoying the snow. Whether it was enjoying the snow or something else, he stood here at this time, which could be said to give Li Tianlan enough face. Ma Si quickly opened the door for Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and walked out of the car. Tianlan is here. Li Huaqing smiled gently and waved to Li Tianlan. President. Li Tianlan nodded and looked seriously at the old man who seemed to leave a way out for himself at any time. His voice was a little cold. "President, you are in a good mood." Li Huaqing laughed and walked over with a cigarette. The snow fell on him and dyed him with a faint layer of white. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly, and a sword intent appeared beside him. As soft as the wind, it swept the white snow on Li Huaqing. "It doesn't matter." Li Huaqing walked to Li Tianlan and took a drag of the cigarette. He looked up at the white snow in the air and said meaningfully, "This snow is very clean." Li Tianlan looked at him quietly and did not speak. "Walk with me." Li Huaqing patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and stepped forward. "Let's have a casual chat and have lunch together." Li Tianlan followed Li Huaqing and said flatly, "I'm not here to have a casual chat." "Well." Li Huaqing nodded and smiled. "Then what do you want to talk about?" "About Zhongzhou State." Li Tianlan looked at Li Huaqing. "I don't know if I am qualified." Li Huaqing was silent for a while and said softly, "I remember you said 2 years ago that you are the overall situation of Zhongzhou State." "I said it before I went to the desert." Li Tianlan said flatly, "You said that I would be qualified to say this after I came out. Now I came out, and my view has not changed. From now on, I am the overall situation of Zhongzhou State." "So?" Li Huaqing's voice was a little vague in the wind and snow. "You're a good president." Li Tianlan said calmly, "Even now I have no hostility to you. In your position you are more qualified to say this than me. But you are not the overall situation, but the person who controls the overall situation. You have done a lot of things for Zhongzhou State and indulged a lot of things, such as the Wang family of Beihai and Chen Fengqing. This may be the overall situation in your eyes. But now I am standing here. In the future, Zhongzhou State should also take me as the most important." His voice paused, and his tone became extremely tough. "This is not a discussion. This is my request. The person who controls the overall situation." Li Huaqing was silent for a long time before he laughed softly. His tone was a little complicated, and the question was extremely sharp. He looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and asked directly, "Can I control you?" Li Tianlan's voice was as calm as water, without any ups and downs. He said something he had said before. "Zhongzhou State does not betray me, and I will not betray Zhongzhou State." Chapter 883. Li Huaqing looked at Li Tianlan thoughtfully, and his eyes were as deep as desire. He had heard this sentence before. Li Tianlan said it in Eastern Europe, and it soon reached his ears. At that time, Li Tianlan said it reluctantly. But now he really had this qualification. That was the problem. It was not a question of whether Li Tianlan could say it or not, but whether he had this qualification. There were many reasons and reasons for love, but it was absolutely impossible to let it down. From an individual's standpoint, everyone was very patriotic, but the premise of patriotism was that the country everyone loved had never let him down. Countless policies, constantly promoted reforms, and public opinion propaganda were like rays of light, radiating to all parts of the country. Everyone's life was getting better and better, and the country was getting better and better. This virtuous cycle led to the prosperity of Zhongzhou State today. For the vast majority of Zhongzhou State people, the country might owe something, but it would never let anyone down. Ordinary people were the same. So was Li Tianlan. He now stood at a high place and had the qualification to stand at a high place. Naturally, he also had the qualification to ask Zhongzhou State not to let him down. Whether he betrayed Zhongzhou State or Zhongzhou State betrayed him, when the follow-up effects continued to ferment, it would evolve into a disaster that swept the entire Zhongzhou State. He had too many things. Behind him also represented too many things. Just like what he said himself. From now on, he was the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing was the president of Zhongzhou State and the most qualified person to represent Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan repeated this sentence again in front of him, and the meaning was already very obvious. You don't let me down, and I won't let you down. To put it bluntly, you have to support me this time. Li Tianlan's expression did not change at all. The two were less than 2 meters apart. Through the wind and snow, Li Huaqing could clearly feel the other party's fierce and almost tough attitude. It was like flying snow in winter falling on his face, with a slight tingling. The Prime Minister is really too impulsive. Li Huaqing was silent for a while and said softly. Li Tianlan turned his head and glanced at him. The other party's voice was very soft. But he knew very well that this was Li Huaqing's official statement. He had this attitude in private, and when he left Hidden Dragon Sea later, Li Huaqing's statement to the outside world would also be the same. The next turmoil in Zhongzhou State would also start from this sentence. This isn't just impulsive. Li Tianlan said flatly. This is a crime. His so-called impulse directly buried the most elite troops of Emperor Dong's palace in the desert, and tens of thousands of soldiers in the Beijiang military region became souls of the dead. For someone as powerful as him, one decision can easily kill tens of thousands of people. Even if he is the prime minister, he can't bear the consequences of this series of consequences. I don't need to pay for his mistakes. What do you want to do? Li Huaqing declined to comment. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. There's nothing much to say. No matter who it is, they must pay the price. Li Tianlan's voice was as cold as ice. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and stopped in his tracks, looking at the hidden ocean in front of him. Under the wind and snow, the surface of the Hidden Dragon Sea was calm. I can ask him to apologize to you, of course, in private, but the cabinet will increase its support for Emperor Dong's palace in the future. In addition, the Prime Minister has been too busy recently. His health isn't very good either, so he can go to the south to recuperate. Wang Yang can temporarily take charge of the cabinet's affairs. I believe that Comrade Wu Zhengmin can become Zhang Yang's right-hand man. Li Tianlan glanced at him. He didn't care about private apologies. No matter how humble Chen Fengqing was, it was meaningless. But to increase the support for Emperor Dong's palace, it had to be done. With less than a year to go before the election, asking Chen Fengqing to recuperate in the south was basically equivalent to an early retirement. The second prime minister, Hua Zhengyang, was in charge of the cabinet's work, and the deputy prime minister, Wu Zhengmin, was further promoted to the second prime minister, which was equivalent to a director's position. There was no doubt that this was the offer of the academics, and also an explanation that Zhongzhou State intended to give Li Tianlan. A director's position, this was the most important bargaining chip. Neither Li Huaqing nor Li Tianlan worried about whether these things would become a reality. Not to mention the academics that Li Huaqing completely controlled and the giant group that fully supported Li Tianlan. Even within the Prince Group, dissatisfaction with Chen Fengqing had reached the limit after the blockade operation failed. This failure not only put Chen Fengqing's position in jeopardy, but also the leaders of the Prince Group were psychologically prepared for the great loss of vitality of the group. The Prince Group just wanted to let this matter pass as soon as possible and reach a new balance, so it was impossible for them to oppose Wu Zhengmin. Therefore, in Li Huaqing's words, although the director's position was an important bargaining chip, the focus was on Hua Zhengyang. This was a deal. Li Huaqing was almost certain to be re-elected, and Hua Zhengyang was the vice prime minister of Zhongzhou State, so he also had one more term. However, it seemed that the academics were no longer satisfied with the position of the vice prime minister. Now they wanted to take this opportunity to promote Hua Zhengyang. Li Tianlan needed the support of the academics. And on the matter of Hua Zhengyang, the academics also needed the support of Li Tianlan and the giant group. Once the academics succeeded, the president and the prime minister of Zhongzhou State would be in the academics, and the academics would enter a period of real strength. Li Tianlan was expressionless and silent. When talking to a leader like Li Huaqing, the other party would not point out a lot of things. If he could not consider any point, he might suffer a loss. To be honest, Li Tianlan was really not used to this kind of communication. He had a headache talking for a while, but at least for the time being, he could not change anything. Li Huaqing quietly waited for Li Tianlan's answer. I don't need his apology. Li Tianlan thought for a long time and said slowly. Li Huaqing frowned slightly and waited patiently for a few seconds to make sure that Li Tianlan had finished what he wanted to say. He just didn't need to apologize. He didn't mention anything about the arrangement of the cabinet. If he didn't mention it, he wouldn't express his position. To be exact, he didn't agree. He didn't agree to let Hua Zhengyang control the cabinet. Li Huaqing's eyes gradually became dignified. If it was before, Li Tianlan's will was not important at all. But at this time, if Li Tianlan said no to Hua Zhengyang really couldn't do it. The war in the desert was over. Chen Fengqing had been in a desperate situation where there was no retreat. He was bound to fight desperately and use all his means to find some opportunities in the dying struggle. Under such circumstances, Li Tianlan not only had the full support of the giant group behind him, but also the Wang family of Beihai, who wanted to stabilize the situation with the help of Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace, would also agree to Li Tianlan's request. The honeymoon period between the giant group and the southeast group would not change at least before this election. If Li Tianlan said no, then, unless Li Huaqing was willing to join hands with the prince group to set off another game, it really wouldn't work. Fortunately, Li Tianlan didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. Did this mean that there was still hope? He thought for a moment and said slowly, "What do you think about the Prime Minister?" This was undoubtedly a test. He started with Chen Fengqing and slowly transitioned to the cabinet to sound out Li Tianlan's conditions. For people at Li Huaqing's level, there was nothing that couldn't be discussed. It was nothing more than checks and balances from various perspectives. But Li Tianlan really didn't want Hua Zhangyang to control the cabinet. It was impossible for him to agree to this matter. Perhaps in Li Huaqing's view, giving the giant group a director position was already very sincere, but Li Tianlan didn't think so. In Li Huaqing's mind, Wu Zhengmin becoming a director was tantamount to adding a heavyweight position to the giant group. The current giant group belonged to Dongqing Wudi. The future belonged to Li Tianlan. All Dongqing Wudi's actions in the past 2 years showed this. But that wasn't what Li Tianlan wanted. What he wanted was a group of his own. There might be a group of people added from a giant group, but what he wanted was a brand new group that belonged to him, one that could help the giant group but could stand firm in Zhongzhou State on its own. For such a large group, a director position was necessary. In Li Tianlan's mind, the ideal candidate was also Wu Zhengmin. Wu Zhengmin was the best choice in terms of ability and experience. The only drawback was that he was a little old and could only serve for 1 more term. Li Tianlan hoped that Wu Zhengmin could take this position, and naturally, he also hoped that he could use this term to formally build the structure of the new group. But if Hua Zhangyang controlled the cabinet, and Li Huaqing was the president, Wu Zhengmin's pressure could be imagined, and he wouldn't even have much room to play. Li Tianlan absolutely didn't want to see this situation. "I don't have any ideas." Li Tianlan shook his head slowly. It was not suitable for him to say too much to Li Huaqing today, and Li Huaqing wouldn't say too much to him either. This game that started 2 years ago had gone on until now. Although the situation was clear, the final result had not appeared. In other words, there were still many variables. The termination plan was exposed, and the desert war came to an end. Li Tianlan reappeared in Yuzhou, which was a stage victory. But no one could say that Chen Fengqing was really on the road to death. After all, the decisive battle in Beihai had not yet begun. If Chen Fengqing defeated the Wang family of Beihai in one fell swoop, the situation would undoubtedly become more complicated. But in the current situation, Chen Fengqing didn't have many chances. It was also because of this that Li Huaqing would meet Li Tianlan. What Li Tianlan needed was Li Huaqing's attitude. And Li Huaqing also gave a clear attitude. For Li Tianlan, this was enough. He still had too many things to consider about what the new group would be like. He looked at the flying snow in front of him and said calmly, "He did something I don't want to see, so I will naturally do something he doesn't want to see." "What is it?" Li Huaqing asked subconsciously. Li Tianlan laughed. In the wind and snow. His smiling face was a little cold and ferocious. His termination plan failed. "Do you think my termination plan will succeed?" Chapter 884. Deep Sea City. Nanyue Province. The lights shone in the conference room on the top floor of the skyscraper. The directors of the Haoyue group shook their heads and sighed as they walked out of the conference room. Some of them even had well-hidden resentment on their faces. The chairman of the Haoyue group, Chen Li, squinted at the directors who were leaving. His eyes were gloomy and his face was pale. "Chairman Chen." A woman in her 30s with an alluring figure and a mature temperament walked over with a folder in her arms. She wanted to say something but stopped. Chen Li looked at her anxious face, and he suddenly felt a wave of frustration in his heart. He picked up the teacup and took a big gulp of tea. After he thought he was mentally prepared, he nodded and said, "Go ahead." "There are some problems with the number 6 plot that was auctioned in Deep Sea City. The approval process can't be completed for now. The woman, who was both Chen Li's personal assistant and mistress, said cautiously. Don't worry about the approval process. It's his business to start the construction ahead of schedule. I'll find someone to take care of it. Chen Li waved his hand impatiently. Okay. The assistant nodded and said softly, 3 hours ago, formulation groups stopped their cooperation with us at the same time. One of them has already paid the penalty fee. Malaysian. Chen Li's eyebrows twitched. His eyes were cold and gloomy. However, he was indeed under a lot of pressure. He could only shake his head and say, what else? Many of our subsidiaries were seized in the morning. Liaodong's Snow Mountain Heavy Industry, Zhongyuan's Xiongzhou Real Estate, Jiangzhe's Red Flag Entertainment, Tian Fu's Yuanhua Group, and... Chen Li suddenly raised his head and stared into the secretary's eyes. He seemed to be in disbelief and asked, where? Tian Fu's Yuanhua Group. The assistant obviously knew what Chen Li was asking and gave an accurate answer again. Her face was a little pale. Chen Li was silent for a long time. Tian Fu's Yuanhua Group. Tian Fu Province. This was the birthplace of the Haoyue Group. The Prime Minister, Chen Fengqing, had set up the Haoyue Group when he was the deputy governor of Tian Fu. The headquarters of the Haoyue Group was currently located in the Nanyue Province, but they had never given up on the management of Heaven's Sanctum. This was a behemoth with a market value of more than 300 billion Zhongzhou dollars. Among all the private enterprises in Zhongzhou State, Haoyue Group could be said to be one of the strongest hegemons. Its industries were spread across dozens of countries around the world, and it could make its voice heard in every province of Zhongzhou State. Central Plains, Liaodong of course, Chen Li could understand that the subsidiary companies in Zhujiang and other places were in trouble, and he was mentally prepared for it. But Heaven's Sanctum? How could this be? The Yuanhua Group was the most important subsidiary of the Haoyue Group in Heaven's Sanctum, as well as a huge source of tax revenue for the entire Heaven's Sanctum. Just what kind of determination would make the Heaven's Sanctum decide to cut down this cash cow? Chen Li subconsciously took out his phone and wanted to make a call. However, when he opened his contact list, he paused. The assistant couldn't help but take a step forward and said hesitantly, President Chen. Chen Li turned around and looked at him expressionlessly. Did something happen to the Prime Minister? The assistant's voice was cautious. The corners of Chen Li's mouth twitched, revealing a bitter smile. Accident? He didn't know whether it was an accident or not. The assistant might not know some of the inside stories, but Chen Li naturally knew enough about the Desert War. He had never thought that Chen Fengqing, who was like a god in his mind, would one day be forced into such a situation by a young man. He was Chen Fengqing's nephew. His biological nephew. The Haoyue Group was founded with the support of Chen Fengqing. For many years, the Haoyue Group had been worthy of Zhongzhou State and didn't owe anything to the people. As one of the leading private enterprises, it also played a huge role and made a lot of contributions to the society. And Zhongzhou State also deserved its contributions. This was a win-win situation. But now, was the situation going to change? Chen Li silently put down his phone. He originally wanted to call Chen Fengqing, but he suddenly thought that if he handled this matter well, could he also relieve some of his uncle's pressure? Chen Li stood up, made up his mind and said calmly, prepare the car. Let's go to Tianfu Province. The assistant turned around and left in a hurry. Chen Li changed his clothes and went downstairs quietly. Chen Li's exclusive black Bentley had stopped in front of the group building. Chen Li sat in the car with the assistant. He unconsciously put one hand on the assistant's slender and elastic thigh in silk stockings, and said calmly, to the airport. The driver started the car. The car slowly left the Haoyue Group building, entered the road, and went straight to the airport expressway. Chen Li's palm gently slid on the assistant's thigh, and the assistant intimately moved closer to him. Chen Li closed his eyes and thought about the next situation. The assistant's phone rang. She picked up the phone. After listening to a few words, her charming face suddenly became a little ugly. Director Chen. She gently twisted her body. What's wrong? Chen Li opened his eyes. But he didn't hear the answer. The assistant's rosy and beautiful little mouth was moving. But all the sounds were completely drowned out in an instant. The ear-piercing whistle occupied all of Chen Li's hearing. The Bentley passed by the intersection. A truck that was originally waiting for the red light suddenly rushed over at full speed. The engine, which was obviously specially modified, instantly raised the horsepower of the truck to the limit. The ear-piercing whistle roared through the whole street. The truck had reached its limit of speed, and like a mad bull, it directly hit the Bentley. There was a loud bang. The body of the Bentley was completely sent flying in an instant. The huge impact completely deformed the car. The bulletproof car window suddenly shattered, and the car rolled from the air to the ground. The huge truck did not stop at all, and directly ran over the truck in a barbaric and almost brutal way. Blood splattered through the broken windows. The weight of the truck caused the fuel tank to burst. A loud explosion suddenly rang out on the streets of Deep Sea City. Flames soared into the sky. The Bentley and the truck were instantly turned into spare parts in the huge explosion. Hooting. Jinjiang Commercial Building. A young woman in her early 20s walked out of the gate of the commercial building with a proud look on her face. Behind her, 2 young men with impeccable height and appearance followed her, one on the left and the other on the right. Each of them was carrying countless bags of various sizes. "Chen Shui, should we eat first?" one of the boys asked cautiously. The woman named Chen Shui was not very beautiful. She was ordinary, but her aura was extremely arrogant. Behind her were 2 handsome men who could drive countless girls crazy in any university. Against the backdrop of a lot of luxury goods, she walked in front like a noble palace master, or rather, a powerful queen. Tired. Chen Shui turned the car key in her hand. Looking at the 2 so-called Prince Charming behind her, a strange light flashed in her eyes. Not tired. The 2 boys smiled along, but their smiles were a little reserved. "Let's go to Park U." Chen Shui stretched, squinted her eyes and smiled. "I'll eat first, and then you can eat. This is your reward. Do you like it?" Almost at the same time, the 2 boys thought of the big bed in the luxury suite of Park U Hotel. They felt a little awkward, but also a little excited, so they nodded subconsciously. Chen Shui. Her eyes were so moist that they seemed to be dripping water. With a little desire, she turned around and strode forward in her high heels. "Hurry up, or there will be punishment." The 2 boys started to jog directly. The 3 of them walked quickly into the underground parking lot. Chen Shui sat in her Mercedes-Benz. The 2 boys were like bullied wives, squeezing in the back with a pile of luxury goods. The parking lot was very quiet. Chen Shui licked her lips and suddenly said softly, "Do you dare to do it here?" The 2 boys behind her suddenly breathed heavily. Chen Shui smiled charmingly. "I'm teasing you 2 fools." She inserted the key, started the car, and stepped on the accelerator. "Let's go." V-room. The sound of the engine sounded. Boom. A violent explosion suddenly blew up all the cars within a radius of more than 10 meters. The bodyguards near Chen Shui didn't even have time to react. The whole Mercedes-Benz burned fiercely in an instant. Chen Shui and the 2 boys let out a scream of extreme terror. The fire was raging. The super high temperature instantly melted the car and the people in it. Yuzhou. Hidden Dragon Sea. Li Huaqing looked at Li Tianlan with a solemn face. "What termination plan?" he asked slowly. "It's the termination plan." Li Tianlan said casually. "It's an old trick. It's not new at all. If Chen Fengqing can play, I can play, and the Wang family of Beihai can also play. Let's play together. Do you think Chen Fengqing can take it?" Li Huaqing took a deep breath, thinking about what might happen. He had a splitting headache. There are many ways to get back at him. "There's no need," Li Tianlan interrupted Li Huaqing directly. "I like it directly," he said slowly and took out his mobile phone. There was an unread text message on the mobile phone. The text message was an address. Li Tianlan smiled, reached out his hand, and gently flicked a snowflake in front of him. The tiny snowflake was completely broken in an instant. Li Huaqing heard an extremely sharp sound of the wind. Li Huaqing suddenly remembered that when he saw Li Tianlan today, he didn't see Li Tianlan's invincible sword, nor did he see the black windbreaker that should have been on him. Cabinet Office. A middle-aged woman in her 40s slowly walked down the steps. Deputy Director Yuan personally sent her out and was saying something with a smile. The middle-aged woman's attitude was reserved and casual. She nodded slightly, looked at the snowflakes in the air, and whispered, This snow is really clean. Deputy Director Yuan nodded and wanted to say something in agreement. But he opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The steps in front of the office seemed to become quiet for a moment. It was dead silent. Deputy Director Yuan froze and opened his mouth again. He wanted to speak, but there was no way to transmit any sound at all. An incomparably sharp sound of wind rang in his ears, tearing through space and tearing apart heaven and earth. The snowflakes in the sky gathered wildly in front of him and turned into a somewhat illusory figure. The middle-aged woman opened her mouth in horror and could not make any sound. The shadow condensed in the air and directly covered the middle-aged woman. Ah! A short scream sounded in an instant. In front of Deputy Director Yuan, the illusory figure shattered again. In an instant, countless snowflakes passed through the middle-aged woman's body. A large amount of blood suddenly dyed the snow in front of the office. Chapter 885. What are you doing? Li Huaqing suddenly had an ominous premonition in his heart. Li Tianlan was standing beside him. But his mind was full of the sound of wind that Li Tianlan had just flicked his fingers. It was fierce and austere, which seemed to penetrate the whole city. I'm chatting with you. Li Tianlan smiled. But now there's nothing to talk about. Li Huaqing stared at Li Tianlan closely. He always felt that things would not be so simple, but he didn't know what was wrong. Suddenly, the phone rang. Li Huaqing's expression tightened. He subconsciously took out his mobile phone and looked at the number. It was Ma Si. The ominous premonition in his heart grew stronger and stronger. He took a deep breath and answered the phone. President, something's wrong. Ma Si's voice came from the phone, and his tone was a little distorted. It was a very complicated tone, which included shock, fear, excitement, worry, and disbelief. Li Huaqing had a headache. He glanced at Li Tianlan, who was still standing beside him calmly, and said in a low voice, Speak. Half an hour ago, Chen Li, the chairman of the Haoyue Group, was involved in a major car accident on his way to Deep Sea Airport and died on the spot. 25 minutes ago, the car of the Prime Minister's granddaughter, Chen Shui, exploded. It seemed to be an accident caused by the spontaneous combustion of the car. The fire was very fierce. Chen Shui was in the car and couldn't escape. Li Huaqing's body shook violently. 5 minutes ago, Ma Si's voice continued, Ms. Chen Li Juan was killed in front of the cabinet office. There was no murderer at the scene. According to Deputy Director Yuan, Ms. Chen was pierced by a snowstorm and riddled with holes. Li Huaqing's arm trembled slightly. The Haoyue Group had been jokingly called Chen Fengqing's cash cow. The chairman, Chen Li, was Chen Fengqing's nephew. Half an hour ago he died. In recent years, Chen Shui was also famous in the young circle of Yuzhou and Huating. Although the eldest daughter of the younger generation of the Chen family was absurd, she was deeply doted on by Chen Fengqing. It could even be said that she was Chen Fengqing's favorite granddaughter. 20 minutes ago, she also died. Chen Li Juan, Chen Fengqing's second daughter, was the chairman and general manager of a large state-owned investment group in the southwest of Zhongzhou State. She enjoyed the treatment of a governor. In a small circle of the Prince Group with Chen Fengqing as the core, Chen Li Juan's identity was extremely sensitive. 5 minutes ago, she also died. Pierced by the wind and snow? Li Huaqing felt the wind and snow falling on his body and cursed in his heart. What kind of messy cause of death was this? His phone kept ringing. Li Huaqing hung up and looked at the phone screen. Countless notifications popped up at the same time. Major search engines, social media apps, and news websites in Zhongzhou State began to push the news almost at the same time. At 10:40 a.m., Haoyue Group's chairman, Chen Li, passed away in a car accident. For details, click. Chen Li Juan's murder happened too quickly. Chen Shui's matter seemed relatively simple. The death wish of the Haoyue Group's chairman, Chen Li, had undoubtedly become a breakthrough point. Looking at this message, Li Huaqing felt like he was looking at an extremely dangerous storm that could devour everything. There was no doubt that this was Li Tianlan and Wang Shengxiao's counterattack. Precise, ruthless, and brutal. In a situation where no one was prepared, that storm blew up from the Haoyue Group, bringing with it a touch of ferocity that everyone could feel. Li Huaqing suddenly turned his head and looked at Li Tianlan. Did you do it? Li Tianlan was also looking down at his phone. The giant group and the southeast group joined hands, so the resources they could use were unimaginable. Countless media outlets were crazily pushing the news of Chen Li's death. Sigh. This was indeed a counterattack. But it was just the beginning of the counterattack. In the next short period of time, countless news about the Hao Yue group would be exposed in the form of blockbuster bombs. And this was also a beginning. Li Tianlan put his phone back in his pocket, smiled, and said slowly, "I'm here. Chen Li died in Shanghai City, thousands of kilometers away. Do you really think I'm an immortal?" "I'm not talking about Chen Li." Li Huaqing stared at him closely. He could be sure that Chen Li's death was not done by Li Tianlan. That was not Li Tianlan's style. What was Li Tianlan's style? It was blatant. For example, he would destroy the Tang family and slaughter the Qi family. He would not hide it at all. Chen Li's car accident and Chen Shui's death were perfectly arranged. It was the kind of perfection that no one could find any clues at all. This was clearly the style of the Wang family of Beihai, or Wang Shengxiao's style after losing Wang Tianzong. Chen Li Juan's death was completely different. The wind and snow pierced into the body? As long as anyone was not stupid, they could basically guess that it was sword energy. In the Desert War, Li Tianlan had fully demonstrated the ability to kill people from a distance. Everyone would suspect Li Tianlan and even believe that it was done by Li Tianlan. "Is it you or not?" Li Huaqing growled in a low voice. The smile on Li Tianlan's face faded little by little. He looked at Li Huaqing and said expressionlessly, "If I hadn't investigated Chen Li Juan clearly, I would even think that she was your daughter." Li Huaqing's momentum stagnated. "You're supporting me now." Li Tianlan stared into Li Huaqing's eyes, and his voice was strong and cold. "Is this your way of revenge?" Li Huaqing sneered. "This is just the beginning." Li Tianlan said lightly, "What I said is that I will support you." Li Huaqing was silent for a long time before he spoke in a low voice. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. He found this sentence very interesting, and it was also very suitable for his current needs. Li Huaqing would support Li Tianlan, but it did not mean that he supported Li Tianlan now. Was he still leaving some leeway? Waiting for the result of the final battle in Beihai? Was there still hope for Chen Fangqing? Li Tianlan smiled. Then he said calmly, "This is your style. How to support you is something I need to consider. Tianlan, remember your identity. You are from Zhongzhou State and the biggest reliance of Zhongzhou State in the next few decades in the dark world. After all, the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister. His family should be protected. Don't break the rules, otherwise." "Are you threatening me?" Li Tianlan interrupted Li Huaqing's words and laughed strangely. Li Huaqing frowned. "This is not a threat. The rules." "What are the rules?" "Tell me what." "Yes, rules." He took a step forward and approached Li Huaqing. When the plan termination was launched, who told Chen Fangqing the rules? When the plan was exposed, who told Chen Fangqing the rules? When the blockade was carried out and more than 1,000 soldiers of Emperor Dong's palace died in the desert, where were the rules? So you tell me, damn it. "What? Yes, rules?" Li Huaqing did not move. Looking at Li Tianlan's eyes that were almost spitting fire, he did not give in at all. "I also told the Prime Minister this. Don't break the rules." Li Tianlan nodded and took a step back. But obviously, he didn't listen. What a coincidence. Now I don't listen to what the rules are and how others treat me. That's how I treat others. What are the rules? In this matter. Li Tianlan suddenly turned his head. In the wind and snow, Chen Fangqing's figure appeared in the distance. Li Tianlan smiled. He tugged and said in a cold voice, "I am the rules." Li Huaqing took a deep breath and did not speak. He turned his head and also looked at Chen Fangqing, who was rushing from a distance. There was no image. It seemed that because he was in a hurry to go out, Chen Fangqing did not even have time to put on a coat. He was wearing a thin white shirt, and his hair was messy because of the wind and snow. His majestic face was no longer serious, but with unconcealed anger and killing intent. He strode in front of Li Tianlan and did not even look at Li Huaqing. Li Tianlan did not move and looked at him quietly. He looked at the culprit who almost destroyed Emperor Dong's palace. Chen Fengqing reached out and grabbed Li Tianlan's collar. His movement was powerful and manic, and his arms were shaking violently. Chen Fengqing pushed Li Tianlan against a tree. The trees shook. Countless snowflakes fell down. Did you do it? Tell me, did you do it? His eyes were red, and he stared at Li Tianlan like a beast that had lost its mind. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Countless snowflakes fell through the treetops, landing on Chen Fengqing's body and his arms. The falling snowflakes were like swords. Blood appeared on Chen Fengqing's palms instantly. Those wounds were so small that no one could see them at all. But the tiny wounds accumulated to a terrifying number in an instant. Tiny drops of blood gushed out of Chen Fengqing's palms. The falling snow pierced into Chen Fengqing's sleeves, arms, chest, and back. In an instant, Chen Fengqing's upper body was covered with blood. Dark red blood stained his white shirt. It was a ghastly sight. Li Huaqing's face changed dramatically, and he said angrily, "Li Tianlan, do you know what you are doing?" The snow was still falling. There were more and more bloodstains on Chen Fengqing's body. Li Huaqing's eyes became completely cold. If the Southeast Group and the Prince Group severely damaged Chen Fengqing's allies in the final battle of Beihai, he did not mind supporting Li Tianlan and re-establishing a balance. But the premise was that Li Tianlan was rational enough. But now Li Tianlan was obviously crazy. Chen Fengqing's nephew, daughter, and granddaughter were all dead. But now Li Tianlan dared to attack Chen Fengqing directly. This kind of reckless madness would inevitably lead to severe punishment by Zhongzhou State regardless of the consequences. If he really dared to kill Chen Fengqing here, Li Huaqing would make Li Tianlan pay the price anyway. It was about the dignity of the entire Zhongzhou State, and then no one could protect him. Chen Fengqing did not seem to feel the pain at all. Blood spread all over his body. He felt the small wounds on his body. The wind and snow pierced into his body with blood, and the wounds kept spreading. It was like his daughter's death in front of the Office of Official Affairs. There were thousands and tens of thousands of wounds. "It's really you. It's really you." Chen Fengqing clutched Li Tianlan's collar tightly, and his eyes became more and more ferocious. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. The wind and snow were still falling. It fell on Chen Fengqing. But the sword intent in the wind and snow had disappeared without a trace. Li Tianlan was expressionless, but his eyes were full of mockery. He did not intend to kill Chen Fengqing. Even if he was really crazy, he would not dare to do so. But he made countless wounds on Chen Fengqing that were exactly the same as those on Chen Lijuan. It was like he was proving something. This was Li Tianlan's style. It was a flagrant and domineering style. "Let go." He looked at Chen Fengqing and said mockingly, "Do you want to die?" Chapter 886. Chen Fengqing's family was not prominent, but it was not grassroots either. His family background was neither high nor low. From childhood to adulthood, he went all the way from the grassroots to the position of prime minister. In this life, he had encountered many threats. But no one had ever asked him if he wanted to die. Li Tianlan's eyes were cold and indifferent. That touch of mockery flashed in his pupils, and then it turned into a faint but extremely real killing intent. Chen Fengqing trembled all over, and it could even be said that he was trembling all over. It was not fear. It was extreme anger. His eyes were red and he said word by word, "Do you dare to kill me?" He grabbed Li Tianlan's collar tightly and sneered, "Come on, kill me. I want to die now. Come and kill me. You don't have to be in such a hurry to die," Li Tianlan said seriously. The snow in the air swirled wildly. The whistling wind surrounded Li Tianlan with snowflakes. Chen Fengqing's body was directly blown away by the wind and snow, and he staggered back a few meters. Li Tianlan reached out to straighten some wrinkles in his collar, lowered his head, and said slowly, "You have to live before your family dies. You have to live before you have nothing." Chen Fengqing stared at Li Tianlan, and he was furious. "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" Chen Fengqing suddenly turned his head to look at Li Huaqing and roared, "You heard what he said and you know what he is doing. He is unscrupulous and lawless. What good is it for Zhongzhou State to keep this scourge alive? Kill him. You must kill him." Li Huaqing silently looked at the old man with a ferocious face and did not speak. Now Chen Fengqing was irrational and would not listen to anything. Now Li Tianlan was also irrational, and he wouldn't listen to anything. Li Huaqing was the president. But the president could not do whatever he wanted. At least for now, he could not do anything. Perhaps Chen Fengqing's biggest mistake was not realizing Li Tianlan's identity. Or it could be said that he realized it but did not want to admit it. In fact, they were all the same. Li Huaqing, Chen Fengqing, Dongqing Wudi, the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace. They were all the same. What a person could do depended on his position. What was the difference between Li Tianlan, who had the full support of the giant group and the southeast group, Li Huaqing, who had the full support of the academics, and Chen Fengqing, who had the support of the prince group? Identity? If identity could determine everything, Li Huaqing would be the president, and there would be no 6 groups in Zhongzhou state now. If identity could determine everything, there should be only 1 academics in the entire Zhongzhou state now. On the stage of power from the top to the bottom, no one cared about who was more senior, who was older, or who had more experience. It was all fake. Everyone only cared about one thing. Whoever had the final say was the boss. Now, Li Tianlan's every word undoubtedly counted in the giant group and the southeast group. Therefore, Chen Fengqing launched the termination plan and the desert war. Now that Li Tianlan had come out, he naturally had the right to retaliate. That might not make sense, but it was very fair. Chen Fengqing was still roaring. The death of his nephew, the death of his granddaughter, the death of his daughter. The continuous bad news caused his rationality to completely collapse. Now, he was like a beast choosing its prey to devour. Suddenly, there was some pity in Li Huaqing's eyes. He was almost sure that at this point, Chen Fengqing had already forgotten their original intention of starting this game. Take down the Wang family of Beihai, eliminate the huge influence of Beihai on Zhongzhou state, make the power of the parliament more centralized, make the road of Zhongzhou state more stable, make the future of Zhongzhou state more brilliant, and let the whole country embark on a more correct path. Obviously, Chen Fengqing had forgotten everything now. The exposure of the termination plan turned the whole game into a war. In the Desert War, more than 1,000 elites of Emperor Dong's palace died, which made the whole thing completely become a personal grudge. Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace, and Chen Fengqing's personal grudge. Personal grudge. Personal grudge. The style of things suddenly lowered to such an extent. They were all figures standing at the peak of power. How could Li Huaqing intervene in the personal grudge between them? That might be the intention of Li Tianlan and the Wang family of Beihai. The original intention of the parliament, the general trend of Zhongzhou state, the future of the country, and the direction of the world. All of this was too heavy, so heavy that countless people in Zhongzhou state could not help but agree with it. Li Tianlan was too young. Wang Shengshao was too young. They were not willing to bear these, because it meant sacrificing their own interests and even their lives. Therefore, the death of 3 people related to Chen Fengqing in a row angered Chen Fengqing, and he quietly turned the so-called game into a personal grudge. This kind of means was not presentable, but after lowering the level, it was easier for others in Zhongzhou state to accept. Li Huaqing knew very well that the most important thing was his attitude. He said he could support Li Tianlan because he was qualified. But the premise was that they solved this so-called personal grudge. Li Huaqing looked at Chen Fengqing silently and said nothing. Chen Fengqing finally understood something. He looked at Li Huaqing and then at Li Tianlan, and sneered. "So you choose to support him, right?" He looked at Li Huaqing and asked. "I'm only responsible for Zhongzhou state." Li Huaqing's voice was slow but firm. "I won't intervene in your personal grudges." Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said nothing. This was the fairest way. Li Huaqing did not intervene in the Desert War, nor would he intervene in Li Tianlan's subsequent revenge. From another perspective, this was equivalent to acquiescence. After all, Li Huaqing was the president. He represented Zhongzhou state and would not intervene in this so-called personal grudge. That was to say, what Li Tianlan and the Wang family of Beihai did not break the rules of Zhongzhou state. Chen Fengqing's body stiffened and he was silent for a long time. He was not angry at Li Huaqing's choice. All this was destined from the moment he decided to launch the Desert War, so he had enough psychological preparation. "I see." Chen Fengqing took a deep look at Li Huaqing, and his tone was a little cold. "Next, it's a matter between us. He stared into Li Tianlan's eyes and said, "Our business has just begun. I'm still young, and I have plenty of time to play with you." Li Tianlan's tone was a little gloomy. Chen Fengqing nodded and seemed to calm down. "Everything I did was for Zhongzhou State. I owe you for the termination plan, but mainly for the Wang family of Beihai. If Emperor Dong's palace didn't move, everything in the desert would not have happened." He said slowly and closed his eyes. "Wang Yuetong is my woman." Li Tianlan said blandly, "You should be glad that you didn't find her. She's just a woman." Chen Fengqing was a little angry. "Everything I did was for Zhongzhou State. What's the big deal about sacrificing a woman?" "It's nothing." Li Tianlan said casually, "Everything I did was for Zhongzhou State. What's the big deal about killing your whole family?" As he spoke, he chuckled softly. "The woman you sacrificed is my woman. If you're really as noble as you say, why don't you sacrifice your wife? Sacrifice your daughter? Sacrifice your mother?" Li Tianlan took a deep breath and said calmly, "I'll go to them, one by one. The Chen family in the southwest, as long as they have a little relationship with you, none of them will survive. In the future, I will play my role in Zhongzhou State and contribute my strength to Zhongzhou State. With Emperor Dong's palace, Zhongzhou State will only be more glorious than it is now. So, for Zhongzhou State, please kill your whole family." "You!" Chen Fengqing pointed at Li Tianlan, his arm trembling violently. "It's good that we've made it clear. From the perspective of your so-called big picture, you have your reasons and I have mine. If you don't want to hear enough, I can make up 100 reasons to let you die. But even if I make up 10,000 reasons, are you willing to die? So, none of these matters, is it?" His voice was cold and calm. Chen Fengqing took a deep breath and pointed at Li Tianlan, unable to speak. Li Tianlan slowly turned around and looked at the hidden sea under the flying snow. He said quietly, "The important thing is that now you're my enemy, and I won't stop until you die." The bodies of Li Huaqing and Chen Fengqing shook violently and obviously at the same time. After Wang Tianzong's silence for 2 years, they finally heard the self-name that they disliked very much again. Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan in his 20s. Where did his confidence come from? "Go back. Just wait for me to kill you," Li Tianlan said softly. Puff. The corner of Chen Fengqing's mouth moved. He seemed to want to say something, but as soon as he opened his mouth, a mouthful of blood suddenly spurted out of his mouth. Fresh blood fell on the snow-covered ground. It was a ghastly sight. Chen Fengqing, whose upper body was full of fine wounds, shook and looked at Li Tianlan unwillingly. His body slowly fell down. Li Tianlan frowned but did not move. Li Huaqing held Chen Fengqing's body. "Prime Minister, calm down, relax, don't get excited." Chen Fengqing's eyelids twitched and slowly closed. Li Huaqing had no time to say anything to Li Tianlan and waved to someone not far away. Ma Si, who had been following behind, trotted over, carried Chen Fengqing on her back, and rushed to Chen Fengqing's residence. Li Huaqing took out his mobile phone and began to make a call. He nodded to Li Tianlan and followed. Li Tianlan stood where he was and looked at Chen Fengqing's limp body with no expression. Li Tianlan could feel the rise and fall of his heartbeat. Chen Fengqing did not die. He was not in a coma. He pretended to be in a coma. There were many effects of pretending to be in a coma. Not to mention what the outside world would think of Li Tianlan after the matter here was spread out. At least some of the dissenting voices in the prince group that had begun to appear recently would stop temporarily. United against a common enemy? Li Tianlan sneered and muttered to himself, "It's a little interesting." Outside Chen Fengqing's office, the guards rushed to Chen Fengqing the moment they saw Ma Si. Li Huaqing and Chen Fengqing's private doctors rushed over in a hurry. Looking at the blood on his body and the corner of his mouth, the 2 top doctors turned pale. There was no need to stop the bleeding. The countless wounds on Chen Fengqing's upper body were too small and had now healed automatically. The doctors were busy taking blood pressure and heart rate. The guards wanted to contact the hospital but were stopped by Chen Fengqing's private doctor. The doctor fed Chen Fengqing some medicine and was relieved when Chen Fengqing calmed down a little. Yuan Lin, the deputy director of the Office of Public Affairs, who had gone to the Office of Public Affairs to deal with some official affairs, had rushed back as soon as possible. Seeing this scene, He wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and politely sent everyone out. Li Huaqing and Ma Si did not say much and left with the private doctors. On the way back, Li Huaqing glanced at Hidden Sea. The young man who called himself the emperor had disappeared without a trace. He shook his head and sighed. Behind the huge office was a small, exquisite courtyard. Behind the courtyard was a small wooden building that was decorated generously and comfortably. In the spacious bedroom, Chen Fengqing was lying on the bed, eyes closed and motionless. Chen Fengqing's secretary, Yuan Lin, sighed and stood up, wanting to go out to get a basin of water to wipe Chen Fengqing's forehead. A hand reached out and suddenly grasped Yuan Lin's wrist. Yuan Lin was slightly shocked and turned around subconsciously. He said in surprise, "Prime Minister." "Little Yuan, go and do one thing." Chen Fengqing closed his eyes and did not open them. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Go ahead." Yuan Lin took a deep breath and said respectfully, "Get in touch with someone." Chen Fengqing said softly. Yuan Lin nodded and approached Chen Fengqing, asking in a low voice, "Who?" "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.